Hello, hello everyone. We should be live now. Let's take a look here. Well, I can see that's Twitch. We'll take that off. Get the YouTube chat up. All right, we're ready to go. Yeah. Oh, it's not quite right, but here. All right, I have the YouTube chat up now. Can make the music a little bit louder here, I think. Or is it just my end? It's just my end. There we go. That's better. All right. Yeah. Let me go ahead and get the word out that we're live, and yeah. That's not quite right, but let's... Actually, I think that link might work better than what we had previously. Oh, darn. All right. All right, that worked. Okay. I know the Scottish Maiden was interested in coming to this. I'm not sure she's around yet. She was streaming earlier. But let me just finish this up. Let's see if this works properly. Yeah, it kind of worked. Okay, good. Okay. Let's get this... Get the party started, as they say. Let me check on her. That's over here, I believe. Oh, that's... doesn't appear to be online, even. Let me just make sure her previous stream isn't still going. Maybe we'll check that. But welcome to another stream. We're live both on YouTube and on Twitch, and we are going to be, hey Alice, and we are going to be reading the Fellowship of the Ring today, which we're nearly done with actually. I don't think we'd finish today though, but since we have, that's the amount of book that we have left. This part here. We have Lothlorien, the Mirror of Galadriel, hey Coyote, and Farewell to Lorien. It's a lot just in Lorien. The Great River, and the Breaking of the Fellowship. So, but these are long chapters. It's going good. Oh, Alice, were you able to earlier avail yourself of the the banana song that I had posted on Discord? It's like we talked about doing that just sort of like to spring it on Wayne all of a sudden, and I did it this morning, and yeah, and I posted it, and his reaction was pretty priceless, I think. Oh, she's still live, I see. Okay, cool. So I don't know if you heard the finished product there, but I thought it came out very good. I was, when I was making it, I was very, into it and getting it done, and not laughing or anything, and then when I listened back, I couldn't stop laughing. But that was me this morning. I was sitting right here and just singing it, into my microphone, and first in this voice and then in this voice, It was pretty funny. Now I realize that I made a bit of a mistake here on YouTube. The last live not the last live that I did on the channel, which was the Council of Tolkien. Oh, I'm sure I could, yes, but I won't. But the last time that we were here doing reading analysis, which was part 8, and I noticed that it wasn't actually live. Like it was there in my live section, but it was unlisted. It wasn't. Hi, Moogle. It's not, members only. It's not public. It's just sort of sitting there. And I was like, why did I never schedule it? I'm usually right on top of that. And I realized that it was in 2 parts. We had towards the end of the stream, it went down for a little while, which is why there's one that's 2 hours and 50 minutes, and then another that's an additional 21 minutes, and that I had intended to edit them together and upload it as a video, and then I forgot to do that. So that's my mistake. Now let's see, that was April 10th. If I still have the recordings, I could very quickly edit them together and put it up tonight, and I won't give it a members only period because it's so late. I would have wanted it to go public last week, and then we'll treat this one as normal. But I had forgotten that. Let me see if I still have the. Otherwise, I'll have to download them from YouTube, which is not. It's not that bad of a thing to do. April 10th. I still have them. I don't have it because I wasn't recording, so I have to download them from YouTube. So I'll do that after stream. I'll download the 2 parts from YouTube, edit it together, and then upload it, and this will go live to everybody immediately. There won't be a period where only the members can see it, because that's my fault. I forgot that to do that. I was probably tired because we went a little late. I was trying to finish the chapter, The Bridge of Khazad-dûm, Gandalf's big death scene, and I didn't get to talk about. Well, I got to talk plenty about the lore and what everything means and Gandalf's speech and everything. But what I didn't get to talk about is the emotion involved here on a personal standpoint. So let me just start off with that. When I was a kid, when I was a little boy, we started off with The Hobbit here, and this is a childhood copy. It's not the first one I ever read. I had a much smaller paperback that I read. I was in the 3rd grade, and I had this teacher named Mrs. Clark, and she was really big on promoting reading, independent reading, and everybody had something called an independent reading folder. And what you would do is in your folder, you would write, there was these sheets that were, these printouts, and you'd write down every day you're supposed to read for, I think it was a half hour. And you'd write down the name of the book that you were reading and what page you started on and what page you ended up on, and then your parent would sign it, And you didn't have to do book reports or anything like that. You just had to read. So it was a good way of, since you didn't have to do reports or anything, and it was sort of like, there were no deadlines. It's just you had to do it for a half hour every day. You weren't. It was a good way of promoting reading just for the sake of reading instead of reading for the sake of like having to memorize something and then report on it. And I always thought book reports were sort of a strange thing. It's almost like you have to just like write a review, and like a critique or something. But anyway, I was reading a lot of science fiction at the time, and but then I was given The Hobbit by my mother. She said, you would like this, which is funny because she never actually read it. My mother was a great lover of The Lord of the Rings, but she never actually read The Hobbit. Still to this day has not read The Hobbit. Her only exposure to it was the films, Hey, Teppo, how's it going? I will get to your question because it's an interesting question. I will get to your question in a moment. because I want to finish the story I was telling, but I do think that there is an answer there. But anyway, the reason that I bring this up is because this is how I read The Hobbit, right? And this was sort of, it wasn't my first foray into fantasy, but it was my first foray into fantasy literature. I had seen movies that were fantasy, but most of the books that I read, like I said, they were mostly science fiction at the time. So, this was really interesting. And then just about a year or two later, here's the Lord of the Rings, and it's interesting because it's, when Tolkien wrote these and published them, the Hobbit was in the 30s. It took him 20 years to write and publish the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers, and then the next year after that, the Return of the King. And and I say that it took him 20 years because he started writing the Lord of the Rings pretty much instantly after the Hobbit was published. Now, I'm not saying that he was writing for 20 years, but it took him 20 years to write. He procrastinated and such. But, and I talked about this in an article that I wrote recently, and you'll see it on YouTube as well. If you think about it, a lot of the children that grew up with The Hobbit in the 30s were adults, and they had been through World War II, and and Tolkien actually was worried about recapturing an audience that might no longer be there, And there was a letter from a little girl that he got that was, she was asking about the sequel to The Hobbit, and he wrote her back and said that, he really hoped that she wouldn't grow up too much. What he meant was that it was going to take a long time, and that he hoped that by the time The Lord of the Rings was published, that she, obviously she would be an adult, but maybe she would still want to read this sort of thing, because in Tolkien's time, fantasy was seen primarily as kids stuff, which is something that he hated. He hated Disney especially, and the way that they took fantasy and infantilized it. But anyway, the reason I brought this all up was when I first, it was intimidating because it's like I went from this simple story called The Hobbit, and then this other paperback is plunked into my lap, and it's this really long title, the Fellowship of the Ring being the first part of the Lord of the Rings, And I'm just like, this is already the title, I'm exhausted. But then, you start reading it, and it's familiar, Bilbo and Gandalf and hobbits and such, and then you're introduced to Frodo, and you start getting into it, and then Gandalf dies, and hey Sparta, how's it going? And the emotion at the time, like I said last time, we were in a bit of a hurry to end stream, and I only talked about the literary value and the analysis of Gandalf's speech at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, and what happened to him, and all that. But I didn't talk about the emotional impact for me as a kid, reading, suddenly they're killing off Gandalf, and this seems like this has gotten really bad. And Gandalf was my favorite character at the time, And it's not to say that I didn't have attachments to the other members of the Fellowship of the Ring, but I'm just like, wow, because he's sort of the leader, and he's dead now, And of course he does return, and I didn't know that at the time because I was reading it for the first time, but it was sort of a very gut punch there. Now, to answer Teppo, does the One Ring make you invisible only when it's worn on a finger? Will any other appendage work? Asking for a melon. Well, of course, I know what you're referring to. And all I could say is that I have always felt that Bilbo, particularly, almost certainly would have tried wearing the ring on one of his toes at one point. Just to see if it would work. Just for, fun. I just feel like out of all the bearers of the One Ring, anybody who had it, Isildur didn't even like to wear it. Frodo was trying to avoid it. Deagle only had it in his hand for a few moments before he was strangled to death. Sam had it for, less than a day, and he definitely wore it on a finger. I feel that Bilbo, he had the ring for about 60 years. He's sort of an eccentric fellow, a bit of an odd sort. I feel like he definitely would have wondered what you're wondering, and I think he would have tried it out on a toe. Now, here's the question. Would it work? And I think it would work anywhere that it would be considered being worn. So I think that's the criteria right there. If it's being worn, then it is going to have the effect that it normally would have. And hi, Daniel. Exactly. That was exactly my feeling. How could they go on without Gandalf, But we're getting to that today, and it's a lot of sadness, obviously. But, he does return in the Two Towers, so there is that, I think my mother might have actually spoiled me on that when I was a kid. I think she might have mentioned Gandalf the White at one part before we got to that part. But I remember being, I don't want to say distraught, because that's incorrect. I was irritated by the fact that Gandalf had been killed off, and then Boromir, he dies later on, and that's more definitive because he's mortal. And of course, I didn't know that, at the time, that Gandalf was an angel and that he would return. I just thought he was like some old man that knew magic, a wizard. So it was when he returns, and then you start to wonder about him as a reader, as a first-time reader. Then you start to, well, how did that happen? And he sort of gives you a little bit of an explanation, not a satisfactory one, and we'll get to that when we read the Two Towers. But he gives you sort of a little bit of an explanation, and it sort of piques your interest. But what really got me, and this is where I first started to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, is that when I saw the book Unfinished Tales for the first time, and my copy that's sitting here, I'm not going to grab it because there's a few things resting on it that I don't want to move around. It's actually the same book. It's the same exact copy. I mean, this I've had since I was probably around 12 years old, but I had another copy before this, and I still have that copy too. It's downstairs. But anyway, it's in terrible shape, by the way, the other copies. But I was irritated and distraught. But, he comes back, and then there's the stuff in the appendix that sort of gives you a little bit of a hint as to what's going on, and it explains a little bit more about what Saruman said about there being 5 wizards. Because I'm like, okay, we know about Gandalf and Radagast and Saruman, but then who are the other 2? And I came across Unfinished Tales, and I didn't read it in order because it's a collection of different things, and I went straight to the section called the Astari, because I had learned from reading the appendix of the Return of the King that the wizards were called Astari, which is it's a plural. Istar is the singular, and it just means wise. So Istar is wise one, Istari is the wise, and it essentially means wizard or wizards. And I read about that, and that's where I really, this is before the Silmarillion, which I got a little bit later, but reading Unfinished Tales really, okay, now I understand how he returned. I get it now, Well, you know what? Tapo, your career as a troll, may it be a long and fruitful one, because I hate to tell you, you're not the first person to bring that up, and like I said, I've written about it before on Quora and such, and talked about, well, if anybody tried something. Now, what I've always wondered, and I think I've sort of answered my own question here, is if somebody swallowed the One Ring, whether it was a person or a dragon or whatever, would they? I'm sure that the ring would be unscathed. There's no doubt about that. But would they become invisible for the duration that it is inside them? And I came to the conclusion that no, because it really doesn't count as being worn. It's, maybe it's the other way around. Now the ring is wearing you, So, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't Smeagol... Oh, okay, so this is a really good question. Daniel brought up a really great question. I'd love to talk about this for a little while. Why would Smeagol expect a birthday present if the custom in the Shire was to not receive, but to give presents on one birthday? Now, I can give you a really, really short answer to this, but I'm going to also give a longer answer. The short answer is he didn't live in the Shire. That was a Shire custom, and the Shire is quite a bit older than Smeagol. Smeagol was about 600 years old when he died. When he was born, the Shire had been around for about 1,000 years. But he lived in a place near the Galadhon River called the Vales of the Anduin. And the Anduin is the really big river that runs from north to south in Middle-earth there. And there is another tributary river that comes out of it called the Galadhon, and then there's an area called the Galadhon Fields, which is where Isildur died, and that's where the ring was found. That's where Deagol found the ring, and then Smeagol murdered him. So he's a hobbit, a particular type of hobbit called a Stoor, but he's not from the Shire. And what's really interesting is that all of the hobbits from all over Middle-earth did, at some point in the past, congregate in the area around Bree. And they started living there. And then they looked around and they found this area, this undeveloped and quite beautiful land to the west of Bree, which in their language they called the Suzat, which is, in English, it's the country or the Shire. And they went to the king of Arthedain and they asked if they could live there and make it their own land, and he said you could not only live there, but you could govern yourselves, and all I would ask is that you maintain the roads and everything. And so that's how the Shire was founded. And almost all of the hobbits lived in the Shire. Some of them lived in the surrounding areas like Westmarch or Bree, but they're still very close by. And I have my theories as to why they all migrated there. 3 different types of hobbits all congregating in this one place that I'm not going to get into right now. But there were a group of Stoors, not all of the Stoors, but there were a group of them that did not like the Shire. They did not care for that kind of way of life. They wished to regress to a more primitive way of life. And Tolkien referred to these as the remigrant Stoors. And they went back to their point of origin, which was the Vales of the Anduin near the Galadhon Fields. And that is Gollum's people. And, we sort of get these hints that they took some of the... Mogul, could you ban that guy? They took some of the customs, like living in holes, but they did not... They did not keep the birthday thing. Now, Tolkien explained this very great detail in one of his letters, but the way that it worked for the river people, which were the remigrant Stoors, Gollum's people, is that presents were usually given up, meaning that you would give a present to your parents, but they wouldn't give one to you. It was supposed to be an honorific sort of thing. And Smeagol was sort of a bully, and his friend and his relation Deagol, he wasn't a nice guy either, but he was smaller and weaker, which is why he lost the fight over the One Ring. And he basically gave him a present because it was demanded of him, and that's sort of what the ring had to work with here, because they're going out on this fishing trip, and there's a lot of animosity. There's a lot of petty feelings going on, because you have one guy who's thinking, you know what, it's my birthday and this guy gave me such a lousy present and I really deserve something better. And then the other guy is thinking, I can't believe this guy made me get him a birthday present, because they generally don't do that. It was Deagol would have given his birthday presents to his parents or to his grandparents and such, not to someone who should have been an equal, but Smeagol didn't treat him like an equal. So the custom of hobbits giving away little presents, they called them mathams, in the Shire is probably older than that. But they had rejected that sort of culture and gone back to a more primitive way of life, and a simpler, more, I want to say, inoculated sort of family structure, because it was a very small community that Smeagol lived in, and it was pretty much his grandmother as the matriarch. Probably everybody in the community was related. You know what I mean? It was probably just a large family of hobbits that were wanderers who settled here, settled there, moved, you know. So that's a really good question, and I hope that's a satisfactory answer. Mogul, if you're there on the Twitch side, we have a bot over there. If you could ban it for me, please. But, yeah. But that was a good question. That is something that I myself wondered, because it seems like, well, that's not what hobbits do. And I think that is part of the reason that Gandalf said to Frodo, oh, his people were sort of like the fathers of the Stores. But, you know, a lot of the Storish ancestry in the Hobbit is older than Gollum. I mean, the Tooks go back to the very beginning of Hobbit culture, so there you have it then. As a matter of fact, I mean, in The Hobbit, Bilbo mentioned that there is sort of a local legend that there was an ancestor of the Tooks that married a fairy, and you know, when hobbits say fairy, they really mean elf, and that explained sort of their longevity in that family, and also the sort of adventurous spirit that you found in that bloodline. And Bilbo sort of rejects it as being nonsense, and it is probably at least partially nonsense. But there's always a kernel of truth to folklore and legends. Thank you, Moogle. So, you know, there you have it. That's from the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. He explained the whole birthday thing because he went over. Somebody wrote to him. You know, Tolkien was asked this. Hey, how come, you know, with the birthday presents? What's up with that? And he explained it all in much more vivid detail than I did, because I'm operating off of memory here. But yes, and we do have a Discord if anybody is interested. Hang out on there a lot. It's not strictly a Tolkien-related Discord, but I do talk about Tolkien-related stuff on there. So let's go. Let's get this party started. Hopefully it's like a Tolkien party. You know, carriages at dusk, ambulances at midnight, wheelbarrows at dawn. That was something that was written on a very real invitation to a party that Tolkien had set up. I believe it was his son's graduation. I want to kill the music, that way we're done with the music. That was just to have something playing in the background while we start here. Okay, so let's get the party started. We're going to head over to this screen here, and we're going to read the Fellowship of the Ring, being the first part of the Lord of the Rings, starting with Book 2, Chapter 6, Lothlorien. To give the recap, they've gone through Moria at this point. The Balrog happened. Gandalf fell. He's presumed dead. Actually, for a little while, as we'll learn later, for a little while as they're traveling, he's kind of still alive. It takes him 11 days to die. So there you have it there. If you had 365 friends, you would get to an average of one present per day. What a devious plan. Well, you know, it actually said something very similar to that in The Lord of the Rings, because it said that, you know, it wasn't really, you know, you didn't normally give out gifts to friends. It was normally just relations. Although Bilbo was extremely generous. He gave presents to everybody. But he said, you know, in a community like Hobbiton, you know, just about every week is somebody's birthday, and so you probably get a present, you know, once a week or so, which, you know, they're not worth much, but they're the sort of little things. We might call them tchotchkes. The hobbits called them mathams. Bilbo, he was very extravagant because he was giving out things that were not mathams. He was giving out, you know, really good presents. But there we have it. All right, so we're going to start Book 2, Chapter 6, Lothlorien. Alas, I fear we cannot stay here longer, said Aragorn. He looked towards the mountains and held up his sword. Farewell, Gandalf, he cried. Did I not say to you, if you pass the doors of Moria, beware? Alas, that I spoke true. What hope have we without you? He turned to the company. We must do without hope, he said. At least we may yet be avenged. Let us gird ourselves and weep no more. Come, we have a long road and much to do. They arose and looked about them. Northward the dale ran up into a glen of shadows between two great arms of the mountains, above which 3 white peaks were shining, Celebdil, Fanithol, Carathras, the mountains of Moria. At the head of the glen a torrent flowed like a white lace over an endless ladder of short falls, and a mist of foam hung in the air about the mountain's feet. All right, already I'm pausing because I wanted to mention the names of the mountains. You guys know Carathras because that's the one that they tried to go over, the path of Carathras. They failed. Fanuthol, not really all that important to the story, but Celebdil is interesting. Celebdil, it means basically Silver Peak, but it's usually referred to by its dwarvish name, which is Zirach Zigil. And Zirach Zigil is actually the mountain peak that Gandalf actually dies on, fighting the Balrog. They think he's dead already, that he's fallen to his doom, but he actually doesn't fall. He falls, but not to his doom, and he makes his way up to the peak of the mountain and fights the Balrog and dies on the peak of Celebdil, or Zirach Zigil in the dwarf language. Yonder is the Dimril Stair, said Aragorn, pointing to the falls. Down the deep cloven way that climbs beside the torrent we should have come if fortune had been kinder. Or Carathras less cruel, said Gimli. There he stands smiling in the sun. He shook his fist at the furthest of the snow-capped peaks and turned away. To the east the outflung arm of the mountains marched to a sudden end, and far lands could be descried beyond them, wide and vague. To the south the misty mountains receded endlessly as far as sight could reach. Less than a mile away, and a little below them, for they well stood high up on the west side of the dale, there lay a mere. It was long and oval, shaped like a great spearhead thrust deep into the northern glen, but its southern end was beyond the shadows under the sunlit sky. Yet its waters were dark, a deep blue like clear evening sky seen from a lamplit room. Its face was still and unruffled. About it lay a smooth sward, shelving down on all sides to its bare, unbroken rim. There lies the Miramir, deep Caladhon, said Gimli sadly. I remember that he said, May you have joy of the sight, but we cannot linger there. Now long I shall journey ere I have joy again. It is that I must hasten away, and he must remain. Hi, Chewie. The company now went down the road from the gates. It was rough and broken, fading to a winding track between heather and whin that thrust amidst the crackling stones. But still it could be seen that once long ago a great paved way had wound upward from the lowlands of the dwarf kingdom. In places there were ruined works of stone beside the path, and mounds of green topped with slender birches or fir trees sighing in the wind. An eastward bend led them hard by the sword of Miramir, and there not far from the roadside stood a single column broken at the top. "That is Durin's stone," cried Gimli. "I cannot pass without turning aside for a moment to look at the wonder of the dale." "Be swift, then," said Aragorn, looking back towards the gates. "The sun sinks early. The orcs will not maybe come out till after dusk. But we must be far away before nightfall. The moon is almost spent, and it will be dark tonight." "Come with me, Frodo," cried the dwarf, springing from the road. "I would not have you go without seeing Caladhon." He ran down the long green slope. Frodo followed slowly, drawn by the still blue water in spite of hurt and weariness. Sam came up behind. Beside the standing stone, Gimli halted and looked up. It was cracked and weather-worn, and the faint runes upon its side could not be read. "This pillar marks the spot where Durin first looked in the Miramir," said the dwarf. "Let us look ourselves once ere we go." They stooped over the dark water. At first they could see nothing. Then slowly they saw forms of the encircling mountains mirrored in a profound blue, and the peaks were like plumes of white flame above them. Beyond there was a space of sky. There, like jewels sunk in the deep shone glinting stars, though sunlight was in the sky above. Of their own stooping forms no shadow could be seen. "Oh, Caladzaram far and wonderful," said Gimli. "There lies the crown of Durin till he wakes. Farewell." He bowed and turned away, and hastened back up the green sward to the road again. "What did you see?" said Pippin to Sam, but Sam was too deep in thought to answer. Now, I want to pause here and explain a little bit of what happened here, and also just a comment that I really love this scene, because we get a little bit of Gimli as a character here. Gimli starts to come out of his shell more and more as the story goes on, and especially as they approach Lothlorien and everything that happens after, because in Lothlorien is where Gimli and Legolas, or Legolas, they're both correct, where they are going to become friends, which is a really important aspect of The Lord of the Rings. Now, what I love about this is Gimli saying that he cannot stop without seeing it, so he goes down to see the Mirror, but really wants to share a little bit of his culture, specifically with Frodo. Sam comes along because that's what Sam does. Frodo can't probably even go to the bathroom without Sam being close by. You know, he's probably like, I'm gonna go behind that tree, Sam. And Sam's like, I'll be on the other side of the tree, Mr. Frodo. You know, that's just the way that they operate. He's never really all that far behind him. So I really like that he invited Frodo to hear a little bit of the Dwarvish language and to see the Mirror, which is incredibly important, almost to the point of being like a thank you for all the likes and everything that I see coming through, almost like a religious experience. It's sort of like bringing somebody to your church or something like that. Now, Durin, let's talk about Durin. Durin was the very first dwarf that was ever made. Now, the dwarves were made by one of the Valar. And the Valar is an elvish language word. In Quenya, it means powers. And they are the 15 greatest of all of the angels, which the elves call the Ainur, which literally translates to the Holy Ones. And the Valar are sort of the ones that are in charge of running the world. They shape the world, they sort of run the world, and they're called the powers not only because they're powerful, but because they power the world, and the world powers them. They're inextricably linked to the planet itself. And one of them was this guy named Aula, and before elves had appeared in the world, before men had appeared in the world, Aula went off to Middle-earth, and he created the dwarves. And he initially created 7 dwarves, the fathers of the dwarves. Durin was the first one. And he was busy teaching them how to speak in a language that he had come up with on his own, which we would call Kuzdul. And then God intervened. Ilúvatar said to him, "What is this? What have you done? You know that you're not supposed to do this." And they had a bit of a talk, and, they get his blessing and whatnot. So Ilúvatar said to Aula, and we'll go into way, way more detail about this when we read the Silmarillion, but you can have your dwarves, that's fine, but we're going to put them to sleep for a while, and we'll set them to awaken sometime after the elves, but before the men, because I don't want them to disrupt the plan, and the plan is that the elves would be the first. And so that's what happens. Now, it's buried deep in the history of Middle-earth, because a lot of people ask, well, if he only created 7 dwarves, and they're all men, how were there any dwarves after that? Where did they find their wives? And so it is in one of the volumes of the histories of Middle-earth, I want to say it was the Peoples of Middle-earth, where it's mentioned that he additionally did create 6 mothers of the dwarves, and that he put them in the earth side by side, that each dwarf lord was by his dwarf lady, except for Durin. Notice that there were 7 men and 6 women. Durin was alone, and he was the first one to wake up. And they were all scattered all around, mostly in the lands to the east. But Durin was far from the other dwarves, and he was alone. And he came out of the Misty Mountains while they were off, like I said, in the lands to the east. And this is when he came out and he saw the Miramir, which is this, sort of reflecting pool. And he looked down, and this is when he saw 7 stars reflected above his head. Durin's crown. Now, we talked a little bit, quite a few chapters back about the 7 stars. The Valakirka, the Wain, the Plow, the Bear, the Big Dipper. It's a constellation that has cultural significance in every culture in Middle-earth. And the Undying Lands as well. And Numenor. Numenor's flag had the 7 stars on it. So, so that's where the whole idea of Durin's crown comes from. And note that he says until he awakes, because Durin, he was called the Deathless. And the reason that they called him the Deathless is, every creature has its own lifespan. The elves, it's forever, right? Until the end of the world. Men, generally about 70 to 80 years is a lifespan of a typical man in Middle-earth, except for, the Dunedain, the men that got their longer lifespan. They lived quite a bit longer, like Aragorn. He's already 87 years old at this point in the story, and he's still, the appearance of quite a young guy. Dwarves, though, live about 250 to 300 years. There are outliers. Dwalin, I believe Dwalin lived to be like 320 years old. But generally, that's where they start to drop off. 250 to 300 years old is when dwarves generally die. And Durin just kept going. And they started calling him the Deathless. And this is why Gimli talks about Durin awakening. Because dwarves don't die like mortals do. They're like men and like hobbits. They are mortal in the sense that they don't stay around forever. But they just sort of go to sleep. And the spirits go to Mandos and they wait. But Durin comes back. Now, Durin eventually died somewhere, we don't have an exact date, but somewhere at the end of the First Age, which might mean that he might have died in the War of Wrath, but we really don't know. But anyway, around the end of the First Age, so with the approximation of when Durin first awoke in the earth and the approximation of when he died, he seems to have lived about 2,500 years of age. You can understand why they started calling him the Deathless. So he finally dies, whether he just finally dropped from old age or whether he died in battle. But every once in a while, every couple of generations or so, there's a dwarf that's born into his line that dwarves can just tell this is him, and they give him the name Durin. And Durin, by the way, the word means king. So, there hasn't been a Durin for a while. Durin the Sixth, he's quite gone. But Gimli is in the line of Durin, although he's not going to have any children. But there are a bunch of other dwarves that are in the line of Durin. And it's his cousin, Dane the Second Ironfoot, who's the king under the mountain right now. He has a son, Thorin the Third Stonehelm, and then his son is going to be Durin the Seventh, who are they going to call the Last. And this is going to be the guy that's going to successfully take back Moria and recolonize it. So, a lot of dwarf lore all of a sudden there. Let's continue on here. The road now turned south and went quickly downward, running out from between the arms of the dale. Some way below the mere they came on a deep well of water, clear as crystal, from which a fretted fell over a stone lip, and ran glistening and gurgling down a steep rocky channel. "Here is the spring from which the silver lode rises," said Gimli. "Do not drink of it, it is icy cold." "Soon it becomes a swift river, and it gathers water from many other mountain streams," said Aragorn. "Our road leads beside it many miles. For I shall take you by the road that Gandalf chose. And I hope, to come to the woods there, where the silver lode flows into the great river, out yonder. They looked as he pointed, and before them they could see the stream leaping down to the trough of the valley, and then running on and away into the lower lands until it was lost in a golden haze. "There lies the woods of Lothlorien," said Legolas. "That is the fairest of all the dwellings of my people. There are no trees like the trees of that land, for in the autumn their leaves fall not, but turn to gold. Not till the spring comes and the new green opens do they fall, and then the boughs are laden with yellow flowers, and the floor of the wood is golden, and golden is the roof, and its pillars are of silver, for the bark of the trees is smooth and grey. So still our songs in Mirkwood stay. My heart would be glad if I were beneath the eaves of that wood, and it were springtime." "My heart will be glad even in the winter," said Aragorn. "But it lies many miles away. Let us hasten." Now, see, that's an interesting... Kayla brings up an interesting point. And hey there, Adby. Feanor watching Namamandos let Durin out multiple times. And I've always wondered about that. Like, why specifically would Durin be allowed out of Mandos several times? And why go through this sort of unique way of reincarnation, of being reborn into your line, instead of, the way the elves reincarnate. And it's something that I'm going to have to tackle one day and do like a really deep dive on. That day's not today, but it is sort of an interesting discussion. Now, I wanted to bring up here about Legolas and Lothlorien and all this stuff. He talks about, the way that Lothlorien is, at least that he's been told during the spring, and notice that he mentions two colors very prominently, gold and silver. And these are two colors that are very associated with the very highest of elves, the elves that come from the Undying Land, the Noldor of Valinor and Eldamar. And, of course, silver was the color of Telperion, the silver tree, and then we have the other one, Laurelin, the gold. And now what's really interesting here, and I've just really talked about this a lot recently, is, as we will find out in the coming chapters, that the reason that Lothlorien is the way that it is because of the power of Galadriel's Ring of Power, Nenya, the Ring of Adamant. And what's really interesting, though, is that she's not the only one with one of these rings. There's two others. There's Elrond. He has Vilya, and he lives in Imladris. And, of course, Gandalf has the third one. He doesn't really live anywhere. He sort of flits from place to place. Now, Gandalf, his ring, it's a more of a personal connection and everything. And he never founded a realm. He's not an elf. So that we're really just going to put him aside here for a moment and talk about Elrond's realm versus Galadriel's realm. Now, it is mentioned that Vilya, the Ring of Air, is the chief of the three rings. It's the one that the High King of the Noldor, Gil-galad, had. It's the most powerful and most potent of all the rings of power, excepting, of course, for the One Ring. And Elrond has it. And of course, we get a show of power with the flood that washes away the ring wraiths. But he doesn't do anything to make his realm anything but other than safe, whereas we get this whole idea of this very unique approach to seasons and the whole silver and gold theme. Lothlorien is the only place in Middle-earth that is like the Undying Lands. It has the timeless quality, and we're going to talk about that after they leave Lothlorien in a discussion between Sam and Aragorn. But what's really cool is the realization, why does Elrond not make his realm like that? Why didn't Gil-galad make his realm like that? Why didn't Círdan make his realm like that? But Galadriel did, because out of all the elves that wore the three rings, she's the only one that's actually seen the Undying Lands. Círdan, born in Middle-earth. Gil-galad, born in Middle-earth. Elrond, born in Middle-earth. They do their best to use these rings, but she's the one that actually knows what she's doing. So that's sort of interesting. That's why Lothlorien is the way it is, because she has a frame of reference. She knows what Valinor and Eldamar are like. All right, now we're going to continue. For some time, Frodo and Sam managed to keep up with the others. But Aragorn was leading them at a great pace, and after a while they lagged behind. They'd eaten nothing since the early morning. Sam's cut was burning like fire, and his head felt light. In spite of the shining sun, the wind seemed chill after the warm darkness of Moria. He shivered. Frodo felt every step more painful, and he gasped for breath. At last Legolas turned, and seeing them now far ahead, he spoke to Aragorn. The others halted, and Aragorn ran back, calling to Boromir to come with him. "I am sorry, Frodo," he cried, full of concern. "So much has happened this day that we have such need of haste that I have forgotten that you were hurt, and Sam too. You should have spoken. We have done nothing to ease you as we ought, though all the orcs of Moria were after us. Come now, a little further on there is a place where we can rest for a little. Then there I will do for you what I can. Come, Boromir, we will carry them." Soon afterwards they came upon another stream that ran down from the west and joined its bubbling water with the hurrying Silverlode. Together they plunged over a fall of green-hued stone and foamed down the dell. About it stood fir trees, short and bent, and its sides were steep and clothed with hart's tongue and shrubs of whortleberry. At the bottom there was a level space, through which the stream flowed noisily over shining pebbles. Here they rested. It was now nearly 3 hours after noon, and they had come only a few miles from the gates. Already the sun was westering. The rings augment reality in a way. Yes, absolutely, 100%. All magic is an augmentation of reality. And I know that Galadriel would not appreciate me using the word magic, but Tolkien himself said that he didn't use the word in a consistent way, so there you have it. While Gimli and the two younger hobbits kindled a fire of brush and firwood and drew water, Aragorn tended Sam and Frodo. Sam's wound was not deep, but it looked ugly, and Aragorn's face was grave as he examined it. After a moment he looked up with relief. "Good luck, Sam," he said. "Many have received worse than this in payment for the slaying of their first orc. The cut is not poisoned, as the wounds of orc blades too often are. It should heal well when I have tended it. Bathe it when Gimli has heated water." He opened his pouch and drew out some withered leaves. "They are dry, and some of their virtue is gone," he said, "but here I still have some of the leaves of Athelas that I gathered near Weathertop. Crush one in the water and wash the wound clean, and I will bind it. Now it is your turn, Frodo." "I am all right," said Frodo, reluctant to have his garments touched. "All I needed was some food and a little rest." "No," said Aragorn. "We must have a look and see what the hammer and the anvil have done to you. I still marvel that you are alive at all." Gently he stripped off Frodo's old jacket and worn tunic and gave a gasp of wonder. Then he laughed. The silver corselet shimmered before his eyes like the light upon a rippling sea. Carefully he took it off and held it up, and the gems on it glittered like stars, and the sound of the shaken rings was like the tinkle of rain in a pool. "Look, my friends," he called. "Here's a pretty hobbit skin to wrap an elven princeling in. If it were known that hobbits had such hides, all the hunters of Middle-earth would be riding to the Shire." "And all the arrows of all the hunters in the world would be in vain," said Gimli, gazing at the mail in wonder. "It is a Mithril coat. Mithril. I have not seen nor heard tell of one so fair. Is this the coat that Gandalf spoke of? Then he undervalued it, but it was well given." So just very brief pause here. When he said that Gandalf undervalued the Mithril coat, what he's referring to is a comment that Gandalf had made, that the coat that Thorin II had given to Bilbo was worth more than the Shire and everything in it. And Gimli's saying he's lowballing it. "I have often wondered what you and Bilbo were doing so close in his little room," said Merry. "Bless the old hobbit. I love him more than ever. I hope we get a chance of telling him about it." There was a dark and blackened bruise on Frodo's right side and breast. Under the mail there was a shirt of soft leather, but at one point the rings had been driven through it into the flesh. Frodo's left side was also scored and bruised where he had been hurled against the wall. While the others set the food ready, Aragorn bathed the hurts with water in which Athelas was steeped. The pungent fragrance filled the dell, and all those that stooped over the steaming water felt refreshed and strengthened. Soon Frodo felt the pain leave him, and his breath grew easy. And though he was stiff and sore to the touch for many days, Aragorn bound some soft pads of cloth at his side. "The mail is marvellously light," he said. "Put it on again if you can bear it. My heart is glad to know that you have such a coat. Do not lay it aside even in sleep, unless fortune brings you where you are safe for a while, and that will seldom chance while your quest lasts." When they had eaten, the company got ready to go. They put out the fire and hid all traces of it. Then, climbing out of the dell, took to the road again. They had not gone far before the sun sank behind the westward heights, and great shadows crept down the mountain-sides. Dusk veiled their feet, and mist rose in the hollows. Away in the east the evening light lay pale upon the dim lands of distant plain and wood. Sam and Frodo, now feeling eased and greatly refreshed, were able to go at a fair pace, and with only one brief halt, Aragorn led the company on for nearly 3 more hours. It was dark. Deep night had fallen. There were many clear stars, but the fast waning moon would not be seen till late. Gimli and Frodo were at the rear, walking softly and not speaking, listening for every sound upon the road behind. At length Gimli broke the silence. "Not a sound but the wind," he said. "There are no goblins here, or my ears are made of wood. It is to be hoped that the orcs will be content with driving us for Moria. And maybe that was all their purpose, and they had nothing else to do with us but the ring. Though orcs will often pursue foes for many leagues into the plain if they have a fallen captain to avenge." Now, Gimli's correct here. Orcs are obviously very territorial creatures, and they'll chase you out of their area. Generally, they're not going to go too far after you unless you have something they value, but they will go far if they have a fallen orc captain. In this case, many orcs had been slain, so that could have happened. But he's really referring to the events that led to, the Battle of Moria for one, but more pressingly and more within his lifetime, the Battle of 5 Armies, which was, Gandalf had slain the great goblin under the Misty Mountains, and so they had a great muster of wargs and goblins, and they put siege to Erebor, and it was already a powder keg because the elves and the men and the dwarves were all ready to kill each other anyway. If you remember, we of course went over that when I read that section of The Hobbit. I have to pause to drink some water here. Of course, the one thing that'll keep the orcs away is the eagles. If they see eagles around, they don't want to be around that area. And the fall of Gondolin made that very clear. Frodo did not answer. He looked at Sting, and the blade was dull. Yet he had heard something, or thought he had. Just to pause really quickly, he had heard something, and it was Gollum. To continue. As soon as the shadows had fallen around them, the road behind was dim. He had heard again the quick patter of feet. Even now he heard it. He turned swiftly. There were 2 tiny gleams of light behind, or for a moment he thought he saw them. But at once they slipped aside and vanished. "What is it?" said the dwarf. "I don't know," answered Frodo. "I thought I heard feet, and I thought I saw a light, like eyes. I have thought so often since we first entered Moria." Gimli halted and stooped to the ground. "I hear nothing but the night speech of plant and stone," he said. "Come, let us hurry. The others are out of sight." The night wind blew chill up the valley to meet them. Before them a wide grey shadow loomed, and they heard an endless rustle of leaves like poplars in the breeze. "Lothlorien!" cried Legolas. "Lothlorien! We have come to the eaves of the Golden Wood. Alas, that it is winter!" Under the night the trees stood tall before them, arched over the road and stream that ran suddenly beneath their spreading boughs. In the dim light of the stars their stems were grey, and their quivering leaves a hint of fallow gold. "Lothlorien," said Aragorn. "Glad I am to hear again the wind in the trees. We are still little more than 5 leagues from the gates, but we can go no further. Here let us hope the virtue of the elves will keep us tonight from the peril that comes behind." "If elves indeed still dwell here in this darkening world," said Gimli. "It is long since any of my folk journeyed hither back to the land whence we wandered in ages long ago," said Legolas. "But we hear that Lorien is not yet deserted, for there is a secret power here that holds evil from the land. Nevertheless, its folk are seldom seen, and maybe they dwell now deep in the woods and far from the northern border. Indeed, deep in the wood they dwell, said Aragorn, and sighed as if some memory stirred in him. We must fend for ourselves tonight. We will go forward a short way until the trees are all about us, and then we will turn aside from the path and seek a place to rest in. Now, just a comment on Aragorn here. Now, Aragorn here sort of has this interesting moment where he's like, yes, there are elves here, because of course he knows this. And it says that it's like something is stirred within him. Lothlorien is a very, very important place to Aragorn because it's where he and Arwen first became engaged. They plighted their troth, which is sort of a very old-timey way of saying that they became engaged. The more literal application of plighted their troth is that they openly declared their love for each other. Now, he didn't meet her in Lothlorien, but she did live there. He met her when she was visiting Rivendell, and he fell in love with her like that. For her, it was a little slower. She had to meet him a few more times. But it was in Lothlorien that Aragorn finally learned that she did love him back. And this is obviously incredibly important to him because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, he's 87 years old, and he's been on this quest to become the king since he was 20 years old. And so, basically, if you think about it, he has been courting his fiancée for 67 years. That's a long time. So, of course, he gets a little wistful here. Even for a guy like Aragorn, you know, that's a long time. He stepped forward, but Boromir stood irresolute and did not follow. Is there no other way? He said. What other fairer way would you desire? Said Aragorn. A plain road, though it led through a hedge of swords, said Boromir. By strange paths has this company been led, and so far to evil fortune. Against my will, we passed under the shades of Moria to our loss. And now we must enter the Golden Wood, you say? But of that perilous land we have heard in Gondor, and it is said that few come out who once go in. And of that few none have escaped unscathed. Say not unscathed, but if you say unchanged, then maybe you will speak the truth, said Aragorn. But lore wanes in Gondor, Boromir, if in the city of those who were once wise they now speak evil of Lothlorien. Believe what you will, there is no other way for us unless you would go back to Moria Gate, or scale the pathless mountains, or swim the great river all alone. Then lead on, said Boromir. But it is perilous. Perilous indeed, said Aragorn, fair and perilous, but only evil need fear it, or those who bring some evil with them. Follow me. They had gone little more than a mile into the forest when they came upon another stream, flowing down swiftly from the tree-clad slopes that climbed back westward toward the mountains. They heard it splashing over a fall away among the shadows on their right. Its dark, hurrying waters ran across the path before them, and joined the Silverlode in a swirl of dim pools among the roots of the trees. Here is Nimrodel, said Legolas. Of this stream the Sylvan elves made many songs long ago, and still we sing them in the north, remembering the rainbow on its falls and the golden flowers that floated on its foam. All is dark now, and the bridge of Nimrodel is broken down. I will bathe my feet, for it is said that the water is healing to the weary. He went forward and climbed down into the deep cloven bank and stepped into the stream. Follow me, he cried. The water is not deep. Let us wade across. On the further bank we can rest, and the sound of the falling water may bring us sleep and forgetfulness of grief. One by one they climbed down and followed Legolas. For a moment Frodo stood near the brink and let the water flow over his tired feet. It was cold, but its touch was clean, and as he went on, and it mounted to his knees, he felt that the stain of travel and all weariness was washed from his limbs. Now let me very briefly just, and I'm going to answer you, Daniel, but very briefly just talk about this. From a literary perspective here, I mentioned that we're starting to see Gimli become more of a character, and now this is the most that Legolas has spoken in the whole book. He's not said a word or two up until now. You know, it's just to, send a plowman to plow, and that sort of thing. So here we're starting to see him start to actually become quite chatty, which is interesting. Now, Now, it is Gondorian propaganda against wizards' pupils, as spread by Denethor. I mean, think, that's Boromir's father right there. And what's interesting is that when Denethor talks about wizards' pupils, he's really talking about Faramir. It really bothers him that Faramir is a student of Gandalf, because when Denethor was young and his father, Ecthelion, was the steward of Gondor, this strange guy came out of nowhere. He came from Rohan, and before that, who knows where he came from. He called himself Thorongil. And Thorongil was this great leader of men, and he joined the armies of Gondor, and he fought against Sauron, and everybody liked him. Everybody really liked him a whole lot, and he was seen as wise and strong and a natural leader. And then one day, he just sort of vanished. And Denethor became steward not long after that, and in that he came into the Palantir, and he started using it almost right away. And this is where he learned that this Thorongil guy, who knows what his name really is, was a friend of this wizard Mithrandir, who we know as Gandalf. And it's really interesting, because the story that talks about Thorongil in Unfinished Tales is, it never comes out and tells you, yeah, this is Aragorn, but you're supposed to come to that conclusion yourself. And Denethor is paranoid in a very specific way, where he's kind of 80% correct, but he's drawing the wrong conclusion. He sees Aragorn, who he knew in his youth as Thorongil, as an agent of the wizard to supplant him. And it is true in the sense that Gandalf is working hard to put Aragorn on the throne. Not because he wants his puppet on the throne, but because it's Aragorn's throne, and he knows this is going to be good for the land, And they're going to have a big dust-up about this later, Denethor and Gandalf in The Return of the King. But yet, it is sort of Gondor propaganda, because Gondor is at this point in their history where they sort of mistrust anything that's magic. So, and that's why there's not elves in Gondor. There used to be elves in Gondor in the early Third Age. They had a whole section of it called Balfalas, and it's called Amroth now. And the prince there, the current prince, this guy Imrahil, he actually has a little bit of elvish ancestry in him, because one of his ancestors was a guy named Imrazor, who married a little sylvan elf girl named Mithrilis. Writing a fan fiction about that. I haven't worked on it in a while. I got to get back into writing that. But it's about how they met and what became of her, because Tolkien is very vague about what became of Mithrilis. She just sort of upped and disappeared after she had his second kid. But anyway, what's really interesting here is, you're right, they do have propaganda in Gondor, and they sort of think of and you'll see this also with Galadriel a little bit. Anything that is called magic is sort of to be distrusted, because that's the deceits of the enemy. Sauron is a necromancer. The Witch King is a sorcerer. Magic is sort of a taboo. So when they speak about Galadriel, they and the realm that she has, it's sort of in kind of ignorant terms. Now, there's a story in Unfinished Tales about Isildur called The Disaster of the Gladden Fields. Never mind that. That's not the one I'm thinking of. There's a different story also in Unfinished Tales, not about Isildur, but about Cirion. And Cirion was a steward of Gondor, and he's the one that helped found Rohan along with Eorl the Young. And there's this part that mentions... No, you know what? I was right the first time. It was the Isildur story. These two stories kind of run together for me. We're going to do Unfinished Tales at one point. But there's this part that talks about the men that travel to the north. And a little bit about the elves, too, Thranduil and his people. But there's a part where Galadriel sort of uses her ring to reach out and veil them for a while and protect them. But they don't quite know what happened, And they talk about her almost as if she's like a witch in a house overlooking a hill, cackling by the fire, and I'll look after you this time, that sort of thing. So, like I said, Gondor, they sort of actually, they don't trust magic all that much. So you're actually correct there, Daniel. It is sort of Gondorian propaganda that Boromir has fallen hook, line, and sinker for. Boromir sort of, and you see it a lot every time he talks. Try to find a part where he talks and doesn't mention Gondor. It's very difficult. If he says more than 2 words, the third word is Gondor. He thinks it's the capital of the world. He thinks it's the only thing holding back Sauron. He doesn't really think anybody else is doing anything. He's really bought into an extremely jingoistic sort of mindset about his country, Gondor. And it's sort of understandable because he's been on the front lines of this war his whole life, pretty much his entire adult life. But also at the same time, you do see how ignorant he is in scenes like this, where he's like, do we really have to go through Lothlorien? Where it's like the best place in Middle-earth. You really do want to go through there. All right, let's continue on here. When all the company had crossed, they sat and rested and ate a little food. And Legolas told them the tales of Lothlorien that the elves of Mirkwood still kept in their hearts, of sunlight and starlight upon the meadows by the great river before the world was grey. At length the silence fell, and they heard the music of the waterfall running sweetly in the shadows. Almost Frodo fancied that he could hear a voice singing, mingled with the sound of the water. "Did you hear the voice of Nimrodel?" asked Legolas. "I will sing you a song of the maiden Nimrodel, who bore the same name as the stream beside which she lived long ago. It is a fair song in our woodland tongue, but this is how it runs in the Westron speech, as some in Rivendell now sing it." Just a pause before we get to the song. This is flying in the face of what the current, the meme says. Legolas does speak to Frodo. He's speaking to Frodo right now. In a soft voice hardly to be heard amid the rustle of the leaves above them, he began. "An elven maid there was of old, a shining star by day. Her mantle white was hemmed with gold, her shoes of silver grey. A star was bound upon her brows, a light was in her hair. A sun upon the golden boughs in Lorien the fair. Her hair was long, her limbs were white, and fair she was and free. And in the wind she went as light as leaf of linden tree. Beside the falls of Nimrodel, by water clear and cool, her voice as falling silver fell into the shining pool. Where now she wanders none can tell, in sunlight or in shade, for lost of yore was Nimrodel, and in the mountains strayed. The elven ship in haven grey, beneath the mountain lee, awaited her for many a day beside the roaring sea. A wind by night in northern lands arose, and loud it cried, and drove the ship from elven strands across the streaming tide. When dawn came dim, the land was lost, the mountains sinking grey. Beyond the heaving waves that tossed their plumes of blinding spray, Amroth beheld the fading shore now low beyond the swell, and cursed the faithless ship that bore him far from Nimrodel. Of old he was an elven king, a lord of tree and glen, when golden were the boughs in spring in fair Lothlorien. From helm to sea they saw him leap, as arrow from the string, and dive into the water deep, as mew upon the wing. The wind was in his flowing hair, the foam about him shone. Afar they saw him strong and fair, go riding like a swan. But from the west had come no word, and on the hither shore no tiding elven folk have heard of Amroth evermore. So this is a very, I'm going to get into what Legolas says about it and everything in just a moment, but it's a very pretty little poem, and I alluded to this earlier when I talked about Prince Imrahil, who's a character a rather prominent character in The Return of the King, has a little bit of elvish ancestry in him. His ancestor Imrasor married a young elf maiden named Mithril, and Mithril was actually the handmaid to Nimrodel, and Nimrodel was betrothed to Amroth, who was the king of Lothlorien. And what's interesting is that in the very early idea of it was that Amroth was actually going to be Galadriel's son. Tolkien changed his mind about that. He didn't want her to have a son. She only had a daughter named Celebrian. But he changed it. He still wanted to keep this character of Amroth, so he changed it so that Amroth was actually in Lothlorien before Galadriel and her husband Celeborn came to live there, and he was the king. And he didn't really like the Noldor moving in. He didn't like, sort of like the way that things were shifting. So him and his beloved Nimrodel decided to sail to the west, to the Undying Lands. Now, it mentions here in one of the stanzas about the havens, and it says, the elven ship in haven grey, and it also mentions a wind by night in northern lands, which might make you think that this is happening in the north, in Lindon, Mithlond. The Grey Havens were at the end of the story where Frodo sails to the west, but it was actually the southern havens in Gondor, in this place that used to be called Belfalos, and later became Dol Amroth, which was named after him. So, Legolas is only telling part of the story here. She gets on the ship and is waiting for him, but then a wind takes the ship out to sea. He tries to swim after it, and then we don't know what happens. We do know what happens. Legolas doesn't know what happens. He drowned. So he winds up in the west anyway, and I guess, he'll come out of Mandos and be with her then. But that's how, basically, how that region of Gondor became known as Dol Amroth, and Imrazor's son became the first prince of Dol Amroth, because it became a principality. And for the whole elvish part, they abandoned the havens. This was the last ship to go out of those havens, at least until the Fourth Age, because Legolas he's going to build a ship and sail to the west from there and bring Gimli with him. But that's a whole other thing. The voice of Legolas faltered and the song ceased. I cannot sing any more, he said. This is but a part, for I have forgotten much. It is long and sad, for it tells how sorrow came upon Lothlorien, Lorien of the Blossom, when the dwarves awakened evil in the mountains. But the dwarves did not make the evil, said Gimli. I said not so, yet evil came, answered Legolas sadly. Then many of the elves of Nimrodel's kindred left their dwellings, and departed, and she was lost far in the south in the passes of the White Mountains, and she came not to the ship where Amroth her lover waited for her. But in the spring, when the wind is new in the air, the new leaves, the echo of her voice may still be heard by the falls that bear her name. And when the wind is in the south, the voice of Amroth comes from the sea, for Nimrodel flows into Silverlode that elves call Celebrant, and Celebrant into Anduin the Great, and Anduin flows into the Bay of Belfalos, where the elves of Lorien set sail. But neither Nimrodel nor Amroth ever came back. It is told that she had a house built of the branches of a tree that grew near the falls, for that was the custom of the elves of Lorien to dwell in the trees, and maybe it is so still. Therefore they were called the Galadrim, the Tree People. Deep in their forest the trees are very great. The people of the woods did not delve in the ground like dwarves, nor build strong places of stone before the shadow came. And even in these latter days, dwelling in the trees might be thought safer than... Oh, this is Gimli, I'm sorry. And even in these latter days, dwelling in the trees might be thought safer than sitting on the ground, said Gimli. He looked across the stream to the road that led back to the Dimril Dale, and then up to the roof of the dark boughs above. Your words bring good counsel, Gimli, said Aragorn. We cannot build a house, but tonight we will do as the Galadrim, and seek refuge in the treetops if we can. We have sat here beside the road already longer than was wise. The company now turned aside from the path and went into the shadow of the deeper woods, westward along the mountain stream away from Silverlode. Not far from the falls of Nimrodel, they found a cluster of trees, some of which overhung the stream. Their great grey trunks were of mighty girth, and their height could not be guessed. I will climb up, said Legolas. I am at home among trees by root or bough, though these trees were of a kind strange to me, save as a name and song. Melurn they are called, and they are those that bear the yellow blossoms, but I have never climbed in one. I will see now what is their shape and way of growth. Whatever it may be, said Pippin. They will be marvellous trees indeed if they can offer any rest at night, except to birds. I cannot sleep on a perch. Then dig a hole in the ground, said Legolas, if that is more after the fashion of your kind, but you must dig swift and deep if you wish to hide from orcs. He sprang lightly from ground, and caught a branch that grew up the trunk high above his head. But even as he swung there for a moment, a voice spoke suddenly from the tree shadows above him. Darrow, it said in a commanding tone, and Legolas dropped back to the earth in surprise and fear. He shrank against the bole of the tree. Stand still, he whispered to the others. Do not move or speak. There was a sound of soft laughter over their heads, and then another clear voice spoke in an elven tongue. Frodo could understand little of what was said, for the speech of the sylvan folk east of the mountains, used among themselves, was unlike that of the west. Legolas looked up and answered in the same language. Who are they, and what do they say? Said Merry. They're elves, said Sam. Can't you hear their voices? Yes, they are elves, said Legolas, and they say that you breathe so loud that they could shoot you in the dark. Sam hastily put his hand over his mouth. But they also say that you need have no fear. They have been aware of us for a long while. They heard my voice across the Nimrodel, and they knew that I was one of the northern kindred, and therefore they did not hinder our crossing. And afterwards they heard my song. Now they bid me climb up with Frodo, for they seem to have had some tidings of him and of our journey. The others they ask to wait a little, and then to keep watch at the foot of the tree, until they have decided what is to be done. Out of the shadows a ladder was let down. It was made of rope, silver grey and glimmering in the dark, and though it looked slender, it proved strong enough to bear many men. Legolas ran up lightly, and Frodo followed slowly. Behind came Sam, trying not to breathe loudly. The branches of the malern tree grew out nearly straight from the trunk, and then swept upward, but near the top the main stem divided into a crown of many boughs, and among these they found that there had been built a wooden platform, or flet, as such things were called in those days. The elves called it a talon. It was reached by a round hole in the centre, through which the ladder passed. When Frodo came at last up to the flet, he found Legolas seated with 3 other elves. They were clad in shadow grey, and could not be seen among the tree stems unless they moved suddenly. They stood up, and one of them uncovered a small lamp that gave out a slender silver beam. He held it up, looking at Frodo's face and Sam's. Then he shut off the light again and spoke words of welcome in his elven tongue. Frodo spoke haltingly in return. Welcome, the elf then said in the common tongue, speaking slowly. We seldom use any tongue but our own, for we dwell now in the heart of the forest and do not willingly have dealings with any other folk. Even our own kindred in the north are sundered from us. But there are some of us still who go abroad from the gathering of news and the watching of our enemies, and they speak the languages of other lands. I am one. Haldir is my name. My brothers, Rumel and Orifel, speak of your tongue. Speak little of your tongue. I have to drink water. So it's a little different from the movie, huh? If you remember the scene in the movie, because they made everything sort of about Gimli and Legolas, you know. It wasn't Sam's breathing. They said it was Gimli, and all of a sudden they were surrounded by, you know, guys with arrows, and then Haldir introduces himself. And here it's sort of like they have this whole community up in the trees, and they're like, come on up, you know, and Haldir and his 2 brothers are there. Of course, the brothers didn't make it into the film, and Haldir, well, they killed him in the movie. He didn't die in the book, so there is that. But we have heard rumors of your coming, for messengers of Elrond passed by Lorien on their way home up the Dimral Stair. We had not heard of hobbits or halflings for many a long year, and we did not know that any yet dwelt in Middle-earth. You do not look evil, and since you come with an elf of our kindred, we are willing to befriend you, as Elrond asked, though it is not our custom to lead strangers through our land. But you must stay here tonight. How many are you? 8, said Legolas. Myself, 4 hobbits, and 2 men, one of whom Aragorn is an elf friend, of folk of Westernesse. The name of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, is known in Lorien, said Haldir, and he has the favour of the lady. All then is well, but you have yet spoken only of 7. The 8th is a dwarf, said Legolas. A dwarf, said Haldir. That is not well. We have not had dealings with the dwarves since the dark days. They are not permitted in our land. I cannot allow him to pass. But he is from the Lonely Mountain, one of Dane's trusty people, and friendly to Elrond, said Frodo. Elrond himself chose him to be one of our companions, and he has been brave and faithful. The elves spoke together in soft tongues and questioned Legolas in their own tongue. Very good, said Haldir at last. We will do this, though it is against our liking. If Aragorn and Legolas will guard him and answer for him, he shall pass, but he must go blindfold through Lothlorien. But now we must debate no longer. Your folk must not remain on the ground. We have been keeping watch on the rivers, ever since we saw a great troop of orcs going north toward Moria, along the skirts of the mountains many days ago. Wolves are howling on the wood's borders. If you have indeed come from Moria, the peril cannot be far behind. Tomorrow, early, you must go on. The 4 hobbits shall climb up here and stay with us. We do not fear them. There is another talon in the next tree. There the others must take refuge. You, Legolas, must answer to us for them. Call us if anything is amiss, and have an eye on that dwarf. So we start to see the beginnings of a problem here with Gimli. And Legolas is, he's a really interesting guy because he bickers with Gimli a lot. And, we saw he kind of sniped at him earlier with the Nimrodel song. He said, they lived in the forest until the dwarves awoke in evil. And Gimli very rightly says that we didn't make the evil. And Legolas says, I didn't say you did. But there was evil. He's sort of sniping at him a little bit, and you get this sense that, this is what he does. And we know of sort of the bad blood between their fathers, between Gloin and Thranduil. But what's really interesting here is we're really starting to see a problem. Now, Legolas, much to his credit, Frodo says there's 8 of us. And Legolas says, we got 4 hobbits and 2 guys and me, and they say, hold on a second. That's 7. This dude said 8. And, he left Gimli out of it. And I don't think he was doing this in a bad way. I think he was trying to kind of cover for him. He didn't want to mention that there was a dwarf. Of course, they were going to find out anyway. But you see the beginnings of a problem. They don't want to let him into the woods at all. And Frodo is like, whoa, hold on a second. He's friends with Elrond, and he's a good dude, and you should let him through. And they're like, all right, but we really don't want to. And they make this ridiculous stipulation that he be blindfolded going through the woods. And this is going to cause a major problem. Now, nobody has spoken out against the blindfold thing yet, but this is going to cause a major, major problem. And it's actually going to lead to something good. And this is a theme that we see in Tolkien over and over and over and over and over again. Now, I'm going to put this aside here because I need the Silmarillion here. To bring my point here, because Haldir's being racist. There's really no other word for it. He's just being a racist. And obviously racism is bad in all of its forms. And we're going to bring out the Silmarillion here for a moment. Boromir is interesting because he has... Abanazir, by the way, hi. I never mentioned this, but I mentioned this in my most recent video that'll go up next Wednesday. But you're named after Samwise, which I find to be very interesting. Boromir is Númenorian in the same way that every man of Gondor is Númenorian. But Aragorn is descended from the Lords of Adunia, and from the first king of Númenor, and therefore also from Irandil and Tur and Turgon and all these fantastic elves of the First Age. So I think that, that's why it wasn't mentioned. Now let me bring this up here. So I'm going to a section of the Silmarillion here, the very first section called the Ainulindala. And I just dropped the Fellowship of the Ring. I'll have to pick that up in a moment. You are. You're named after. So Bonazir is Samwise's real name. That's what it was. That's how you'd say it in Westron. Sam is the English translation. Bonazir is Samwise, and just Bon would be Sam. I'm going to read you this one little paragraph from the Silmarillion. Then Iluvatar spoke, and he said, Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that ye may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar. Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done, and thou, Melkor, shall see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me. Nor can any alter the music in my despite, for he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument the devising of things more wonderful which he himself hath not imagined. So, not to go too much into the story there, but the lesson... Hold on, I gotta get the Fellowship of the Ring. I dropped it. The lesson is that good things do come from evil. And we see this time and time again. Something bad happens. And it is bad. We shouldn't celebrate it just because something good came of it later. And that was a lesson that Mandos said a little bit later in the book. But good things do come from evil. Now, here we have a little bit of petty evil from the elves here. They're being racist. They don't want a dwarf around. They insist on sort of segregating him and blindfolding him and all this ridiculous stuff. And this is going to lead to something more wonderful. Because the elves and the dwarves are going to become great friends. And it's going to be Galadriel. She's going to come sort of sweeping in there and fix this, sort of brain rot that Haldir is suffering from right now. Oh, I very quickly got back to where I was. Okay. Legolas at once went down the ladder to take Haldir's message, and soon afterwards Merry and Pippin clambered up into the high flet. They were out of breath and seemed rather scared. There, said Merry, panting. We have lugged up your blankets as well as our own. Strider has hidden all the rest of our baggage in a deep drift of leaves. You have no need of your burdens, said Haldir. It is cold in the treetops in winter, though the wind tonight is in the south. But we have food and drink to give you all that will drive away the night chill, and we have skins and cloaks to spare. The hobbits accepted this second and far better supper very gladly. Then they wrapped themselves warmly, not only in the fur cloaks of the elves, but in their own blankets as well, and tried to go to sleep. But weary as they were, only Sam found that easy to do. Hobbits do not like heights, and do not sleep upstairs, even when they have any stairs. The flat was not at all to their liking as a bedroom. It had no walls, not even a rail. Only on one side was there a light plated screen, which could be moved and fixed in different places according to the wind. Pippin went on talking for a while. I hope, if I do go to sleep in the bedloft, that I shan't roll off, he said. Once I do get to sleep, said Sam, I shall go on sleeping whether I roll off or no. And the less said, the sooner I'll drop off, if you take my meaning. I love that line, because Sam is so polite, he's such a nice guy. He never really, says anything rude. But he's kind of telling Pippin to shut up. Frodo lay for some time awake, and looked up at the stars glinting through the pale roof of quivering leaves. Sam was snoring at his side long before he himself closed his eyes. He could dimly see the grey forms of two elves sitting motionless with their arms about their knees, speaking in whispers. The other had gone down to take up his watch on one of the lower branches. At last, lulled by the wind in the boughs above and the sweet murmur of the falls of Nimrodel below, Frodo fell asleep with the song of Legolas running in his mind. Late in the night he woke. The other hobbits were asleep. The elves were gone. The sickle moon was gleaming dimly among the leaves. The wind was still. A little way off he heard a harsh laugh and the tread of many feet on the ground below. There was a ring of metal. The sounds died slowly away and seemed to go southward off into the wood. A head appeared suddenly through the hole in the floor. Frodo sat up in alarm and saw that it was a grey-hooded elf. He looked towards the hobbit. "What is it?" said the Frodo. "Yerch," said the elf in a hisping whisper, and cast to the flet the rope ladder rolled up. So just to pause briefly here, I mean, it's going to tell you, but Yurch is the Sindarin term for orcs. Orc itself is a Quenya term, and Yurch is the Sindarin term for that. Orcs, said Frodo. What are they doing? But the elf had gone. There was no more sounds. Even the leaves are silent, and the very falls seemed to be hushed. Frodo sat and shivered in his wraps. He was thankful that they had not been caught on the ground, but he felt that the trees offered little protection, except concealment. Orcs were as keen as hounds on a scent, as it was said, and they could also climb. He drew out Sting. It flashed and glittered like a blue flame, and then slowly faded again and grew dull. In spite of the fading of his sword and the feeling of immediate danger, did not leave Frodo, rather it grew stronger. He got up and crawled to the opening and peered down. He was almost certain that he could hear stealthy movements in the trees foot far below. Not elves, for the woodland folk were altogether noiseless in their movements. Then he heard faintly a sound like sniffing, and something seemed to be scrabbling at the bark of the tree trunk. He stared down at the dark, holding his breath. Something was now climbing slowly, and its breath came like a soft hissing through closed teeth. Then, coming up close to the stem, Frodo saw two pale eyes. They stopped and gazed upward, unwinking. Suddenly they turned away, and a shadowy figure slipped round the trunk of the tree and vanished. Immediately afterwards Haldir came climbing swiftly up through the branches. There was something in the tree that I have never seen before, he said. It was not an orc. It fled as soon as I touched the tree stem. It seemed to be wary and to have some skill in trees, or I might have thought that it was one of you hobbits. I did not shoot, for I dared not arouse any cries. We cannot risk battle. A strong company of orcs has passed. They crossed down the old road beside the river. They seemed to pick up some scent, and then they searched the ground for a while near the place where you halted. The three of us could not challenge 100, so he went ahead and spoke with feigned voices, leading them on into the wood. Orphan has now gone in haste back to our dwellings to warn our people. None of the orcs will ever return out of Lorien, and there will be many elves hidden on the northern border before another night falls. But you must take the road south as soon as it is fully light. Yes, that was Gollum. Exactly, Fusebowl. That was absolutely Gollum. He comments later on that he didn't like touching the trees in Lorien because he thought they smelled really bad. But that's part of the whole idea that anything elvish, and particularly anything related to the High Elves, is sort of anathema to him. Which is why when he was captured, he was sent to Mirkwood, because the elves there are a little more rustic, and he can deal with that a little better. Day came pale from the east. As the light grew, it filtered through the yellow leaves of the mallarn, and it seemed to the hobbits the early sun of a cool summer's morning was shining. Pale blue sky peeped through the moving branches. Looking through an opening on the south side of the flet, Frodo saw all the wet valley of the Silverlode lying like a sea of fallow gold, tossing gently in the breeze. The morning was still young and cold when the company set out again, guided now by Haldir and his brother Rúmil. "Farewell, sweet Nimrodel," cried the Legolas. Frodo looked back and caught a gleam of white foam among the grey tree stems. "Farewell," he said. It seemed to him that he would never again hear running water so beautiful, forever blending its innumerable notes in an endless changeful music. They went back to the path that still went on along the west side of the Silverlode, and for some way they followed it southward. There were prints of orc feet in the earth, but soon Haldir turned aside into the trees and halted on the bank of the river under their shadows. "There is one of my people yonder across the stream," he said, "though you may not see him." He gave a call like the low whistle of a bird, and out of a thicket of young trees an elf stepped, clad in grey, but with his hood thrown back. His hair glinted like gold in the morning sun. Haldir skillfully cast over the stream a coil of grey rope, and he caught it and bound it to the end of a tree near the bank. "Celebrant is already a strong stream here, as you see," said Haldir, "and it runs both swift and deep, and is very cold. We do not set foot in it so far north unless we must. But in these days of watchfulness we do not make bridges. This is how we cross. Follow me." He made his end of the rope fast about the other tree, and ran lightly along it, over the river and back again, as if he were on a road. "I can walk this path," said Legolas, "but the others have not this skill. Must they swim?" "No," said Haldir. "We have 2 more ropes. We will fasten them above the other, one shoulder high, and another half high, and holding these the strangers should be able to cross with care." When this slender bridge had been made, the company passed over, some cautiously and slowly, others more easily. Of the hobbits, Pippin proved the best, for he was sure-footed, and he walked over quickly, holding only with one hand, but he kept his eyes on the bank ahead and did not look down. Sam shuffled along, clutching hard and looking down into the pale, eddying water as if it was a chasm into the mountains. He breathed with relief when he was safely across. "Live and learn, as my gaffer used to say," though he was thinking of gardening, not of roosting like a bird, nor of trying to walk like a spider. Not even my Uncle Andy ever did a trick like that. When at length all the company was gathered on the east bank of the Silverlode, the elves untied the ropes and coiled 2 of them. Rúmel, who had remained on the other side, drew back the last one, slung it on his shoulder, and with a wave of his hand went away, back to Nimrodel to keep watch. "Now, friends," said Haldir, "you have entered the Nath of Lorien, or the Gore, as you would say, for it is the land that lies like a spearhead between the arms of the Silverlode and Anduin the Great. We allow no strangers to spy out the secrets of the Nath. Few indeed are permitted even to set foot here. As was agreed, I shall here blindfold the eyes of Gimli the Dwarf. The others may walk free for a while until we come nearer to our dwellings, down in Egladil, in the angle between the waters." Now, notice that, he brings up the idea of putting this blindfold on Gimli, and it's sort of like, as we agreed, and you know what Gimli's thinking, "I agreed to no such thing," This was something that he said to Legolas, and it's very clear that Legolas did not tell Gimli about what was going to happen here, because it's going to become a problem, as I said earlier. This was not at all to the liking of Gimli. "This agreement was made without my consent," he said. "I will not walk blindfolded like a beggar or a prisoner, and I am no spy. My folk have never had dealings with any of the servants of the enemy. Neither have we done harm to the elves. I am no more likely to betray you than Legolas or any other of my companions." "I do not doubt you," said Haldir. "Yet this is our law. I am not the master of the law and cannot set it aside. I have done much in letting you set foot over Celebrant." So Haldir is sort of giving the "I'm only following orders" nonsense, which, like I said, Galadriel is not going to like this. Gimli was obstinate. He planted his feet firmly apart and laid his hand upon the haft of his axe. "I shall go forward free," he said, "or I will go back and seek my own land where I am known to be true of word, though I perish alone in the wilderness." "You cannot go back," said Haldir sternly. "Now you have come this far, you must be brought before the Lord and Lady. They shall judge you, to hold you or to give you leave, as they will. You cannot cross the rivers again, and behind you there are now secret sentinels that you cannot pass. You would be slain before you saw them." Gimli drew his axe from his belt. Haldir and his companion bent their bows. "A plague on dwarves and their stick necks," said Legolas. "Come," said Aragorn. "If I am still to lead this company, you must do as I bid. It is hard upon the dwarf to be thus singled out. We will all be blindfolded, even Legolas. That will be the best, though it make the journey more slow and dull." Gimli laughed suddenly. "A merry troop of folks we shall look. Will Haldir lead us on a string, like many blind beggars with one dog? But I will be content if only Legolas here shares my blindness." "I am an elf and a kinsman here," said Legolas, becoming angry in his turn. "Now let us cry a plague upon the stiff necks of elves," said Aragorn. "But the company shall all fare alike. Come, bind our eyes, Haldir." Well, it's interesting because you could say that, but I kind of side with Aragorn on this one. It was okay as long as it was quick. He said just be quick about it. And like I said, I really love that scene, Charles, because it shows him sharing a little bit of his culture with Frodo. And we get to hear a little bit about Durin, I really like that scene as a character moment for Gimli, that he couldn't help himself, not only to take a look at the Mirror, but to invite Frodo to come along with him. So I would say you might see it as irresponsible, but considering that Aragorn was okay with it, I should say that we should probably be okay with it. Let's see, here we are. "I shall claim full amends for every fallen stubbed toe if you do not lead us well," said Gimli, as they bound a cloth about his eyes. "You will have no claim," said Haldir. "I shall lead you well, and the paths are smooth and straight." "Alas for the folly of these days," said Legolas. Here all are enemies of one enemy. And yet I must walk blind while the sun is merry in the woodland under leaves of gold. Folly it may seem, said Haldir. Indeed, in nothing is in the power of the Dark Lord more clearly shown than in the estrangement that divides all those who still oppose him. Yet so little faith and trust do we find now in the world beyond Lothlorien, unless maybe in Rivendell, that we dare not by our own trust endanger our land. We live now upon an island amid many perils, and our hands are more often upon the bowstring than upon the harp. The rivers long defended us, but they assure guard no lore, for the shadow has crept northward all about us. Some speak of departing, yet for that it already seems too late. The mountains to the west are growing evil, to the east the lands are waste and full of Sauron's creatures, and it is rumored that we cannot now safely pass southward through Rohan, and the mouths of the great river are watched by the enemy. Even if we could not come to the shores of the sea, we should find no longer any shelter there. It is said that there are still havens of the high elves, but they are far north and west, beyond the land of the halflings. But where that may be, though the lord and lady may know, I do not. Now this is really interesting, Haldir's little speech here. He's sort of giving a bit of a defense for the way that he's being, and he's saying, look, we're surrounded by enemies, and I hate that this is what it's come to. I hate that we have to treat you like this. And Galadriel's going to come along and say, well, you really don't. There's no excuse for this, And she's right. There is no excuse for this sort of thing for the races to fight amongst themselves when they all share a common enemy. And this sort of law, this is the sort of thing that came from Celeborn, not from Galadriel. And we also know, let's be honest, which of them is really in charge. Celeborn might be older, and, he might be a kinsman of Elothingal himself, grandson of Elmo, but she's really the one running the show here. This is really her land. Now, what's really interesting here is he says, we can't even get to the Undying Lands. We've heard that there's a way, but it lies somewhere to the west of the Shire, and we really don't know where that is. And that's interesting because it really shows that the elves in this part of the world are really feeling that they're completely boxed in and without hope. They don't even know where the Grey Havens are. Galadriel, of course, knows. But it's not something that she's spreading around because she's still at the point where she doesn't want to go to the Undying Lands. No, yeah, it was that he was singled out. It was 100% that he was singled out. And keep in mind that it was Aragorn's idea that they all be blindfolded, because Aragorn is the wise one here. He's saying the issue here is an issue of inequality. And if you really are going to be this way and not let him pass without a blindfold, then we're all going to be blindfolded, because then that way is equal. And then Gimli is being like, oh, you know what? If you only did it to Legolas, I would be okay with that. And Aragorn's like, no, we're not doing that, because then that's still unequal. We're all going to be treated equally here. We're not going to single you and Legolas out, because then it's really not much better, even if you feel better about it. I also think Gimli was half joking when he said that, but it's definitely an attack on his pride, because Gimli is used to being treated as as a noble dwarf. He's well respected. So this is sort of like very unusual for him. And of course, he gains everybody's respect that he's around. All of the Fellowship really do this. Yeah. Well, let's continue onwards here. You ought to at least to guess, since you have seen us, said Merry. There are elf havens west of my land, the Shire, where hobbits live. Happy folk are hobbits to dwell near the shores of the sea, said Haldir. It is long indeed since any of my folk have looked on it, yet we still remember it in song. Tell me of these havens as we walk. I cannot, said Merry, I have never seen them. I have never been out of my own land before. And if I had known what the world outside was like, I don't think I should have had the heart to leave it. Not even to see fair Lothlorien, said Haldir. The world is indeed full of peril, and in it there are many dark places, but still there is much that is fair. And though in all lands love is now mingled with grief, it grows perhaps the greater. Some there are among us who sing that the shadow will draw back, and peace shall come again. Yet I do not believe that the world about us will ever again be as it was of old, or the light of the sun as it was aforetime. For the elves, I fear, it will prove at best a truce, in which they may pass to the sea unhindered and leave the Middle-earth forever. Alas for Lothlorien that I love. It would be a poor life in a land where no malorn grow. But if there are malorn trees beyond the great seas, none have reported it. As they spoke thus, the company filed slowly along the paths in the woods, led by Haldir, where the other elf walked behind. They felt the ground beneath their feet smooth and soft, and after a while they walked more freely without fear of hurt or fall. Being deprived of sight, Frodo found his hearing and other senses sharpened. He could smell the trees and the trodden grass. He could hear many different notes in the rustle of the leaves overhead. The river murmuring away on his right, the thin, clear voices of birds in the sky. He felt the sun upon his face and hands when they passed through the open glade. As soon as he set foot upon the far bank of Silverlode, a strange feeling had come upon him, and it deepened as he walked into the Nath. It seemed to him that he had stepped over a bridge of time into a corner of the elder days, and was now walking in a world that was no more. In Rivendell there was memory of ancient things. In Lorien the ancient things still lived on in the waking world. Evil had been seen and heard there. Sorrow had been known. The elves feared and distrusted the world outside. Wolves were howling on the wood's borders, but on the land of Lorien no shadow lay. And I alluded to this earlier when I talked about the power of the rings that Elrond has and that Galadriel has. And this illustrates the point that I made earlier perfectly. In Rivendell, they know stories of the Undying Lands, of the Elder Days, whereas here it's real, and it's because Galadriel is wielding this power, and she has been there. She was born there. She saw it all happen. She walked over the Helcaraxa. She came here from the Undying Lands. Like I said, Elrond, born in Middle-earth. Gil-galad, born in Middle-earth. Círdan, born in Middle-earth. Even though he's older than Galadriel, he had never been to the Undying Lands. All that day the company marched on till they felt the cool evening come, and heard the early night wind whispering among many leaves. Then they rested and slept without fear upon the ground, for their guides would not permit them to unbind their eyes, and they could not climb. In the morning they went on again, walking without haste. As soon as they halted, and Frodo was aware that they had passed out under the shining sun, suddenly he heard a sound of many voices all about him. A marching host of elves had come up silently. They were hastening toward the northern borders to guard against any attack from Moria, and they brought news, some of which Haldir reported. The marauding orcs had been waylaid and almost all destroyed. The remnant had fled westward toward the mountains and were being pursued. A strange creature had also been seen, running with bent back and with hands near the ground, like a beast and yet not of beast shape. It had eluded capture, and they had not shot it, not knowing whether it was good or ill, and it had vanished down the Silverlode southward. Also, said Haldir, they bring me a message from the Lord and Lady of the Galadrim. You are all to walk free, even the dwarf Gimli. It seems that the lady knows who and what is in each member of your company. New messages have come from Rivendell, perhaps. I love this. I love this. Galadriel probably met Sauron, or his boss, that is Melkor. Probably, yeah. Probably, yeah. Well, Sauron, probably not. Sauron was actually in the Undying Lands for a really, really short amount of time. He came over with the Ainur when they left Almarin and they went to the west, and then he very quickly left and went back to Middle-earth. So he was there for like a little bit of time, and I think it was probably before Galadriel was born. But she definitely would have met Melkor, because he was walking around talking to elves all the time, you know, and she had a special dislike for her uncle Feanor, and part of it was probably just the way that Feanor was influenced by Melkor. Although, you know, obviously when we go into Unfinished Tales and we go into the Silmarillion, we're going to learn a lot more about Melkor and Feanor and Unfinished Tales, especially Galadriel. But yeah, I think that she definitely would have met Melkor at one point or another in the Undying Lands, but probably not Sauron. I think he was only there for a very, very small amount of time, and that was probably before she was born. Let's see, where were we? He had removed the bandage first from Gimli's eyes. "Your pardon," he said, bowing low. "Look on us now with friendly eyes. Look, and be glad, for you are the first dwarf to behold the trees of the Nath of Lorien since Durin's day." When his eyes were in turn uncovered, Frodo looked up and caught his breath. They were standing in an open space. To the left stood a great mound, covered with a sward of grass as green as springtime in the elder days. Upon it, as a double crown, grew 2 circles of trees. The outer had a bark of snowy white, and were leafless but beautiful in their shapely nakedness. The inner was malin trees of great height, still arrayed in pale gold. I am so sorry, that raid message from Twitch, that scared the bejesus out of me. And here on the Twitch side of things, we are being raided by Scottish Maiden and her clan. Scottish Maiden, Lambaswell, give it to us raw and Rutland. Welcome into Scottish Maiden and to Last Arrows and everything. That raid message, because I'm doing such a quiet stream here we're reading the Fellowship of the Ring here, and that scared me. Thank you for coming on in. I know you were hoping to be a part of this as we are reading the Fellowship of the Ring and analyzing it. So, let's see. Let me just finish this part and then I'll reflect on that. Huzzah, indeed. Indeed, Chewie. High amid the branches of a towering tree that stood in the center of all there gleamed a white flet. At the feet of the trees and all about the green hillsides, the grass was studded with small golden flowers shaped like stars. Among them, nodding on slender stalks, were other flowers, white and palest green, that glimmered as amid the rich hue of the grass. Over all the sky was blue, and the sun of afternoon glowed upon the hill and cast long green shadows beneath the trees. "Behold, you are come to Caran Amroth," said Haldir. "For this is the heart of the ancient realm as it was long ago. And here is the mound of Amroth, where in happier days his high house was built. Here ever bloomed the winter flowers and the unfading grass, the yellow Eleanor and the pale Nimrodel. Here we will stay and come to the city of the Galadrim at dusk." Okay, here we'll pause for a moment there. Need to stop for a change of pants? Thankfully not. Thankfully not. I feel like that's something that Sam would say, if they got spooked, suddenly, and Sam would say, "I need a change of pants, Mr. Frodo." I may put you to sleep. I know it is late for you there. People have told me time and time again that they could fall asleep to my voice, or that they have fallen asleep to my voice, and I do find this to be a compliment, if anything. Oh, and hello there. Yimmy Express. I hope I'm saying it right. No problem. Lurk around. Thank you for coming in all the way from Australia. I have no idea what time of day it is there. Probably, I would guess, early morning. But welcome in as well. Okay. Thank you for posting the Discord link there on YouTube. Moogle, if you're still there on the Twitch side, could you post a Discord link? It's 11 a.m. on Friday. Okay, so late morning. I wasn't that far off, but okay. Well, I hope you're going to have a good Friday here. Well, thank you, CW Train. See, yeah, I've heard that many times, that people will fall asleep to the sound of my voice, and I enjoy hearing that, actually. Some people are like, "I don't mean this in a bad way," and I'm like, "No, I know you don't mean it in a bad way. I know you're not saying I'm boring, but you're saying my voice is soothing," which, like I said, I take that in a good way. The others cast themselves down the fragrant grass, but Frodo stood a while, lost in wonder. It seemed to him that he had stepped through a high window that looked on a vanished world. A light was upon it, for which his language had no name. All that he saw was shapely, but the shapes seemed at once clear-cut, as if they had been first conceived and drawn at the uncovering of his eyes, and as ancient as if they had endured forever. He saw no color, But those he knew, gold and white and blue and green, but they were fresh and poignant, as if he had at that moment first perceived them, and made for them names new and wonderful. In winter here no heart could mourn for summer or for spring. No blemish or sickness or deformity could be seen in anything that grew upon the earth. On the land of Lorien there was no stain. And this is shapely, yes. This, you know what I'm going to do, actually, is I'm going to copy this Discord link from the YouTube and bring it over to the Twitch side, so that anybody on Twitch who wants to join the Discord can do so. Let me just copy that over, because I think Moogle has stepped away or possibly fallen asleep. So let me just pop that in there for anyone that wants to join. This goes into what I was saying earlier, that Lothlorien is the one place in Middle-earth that is like the Undying Lands. And I hate to just keep bringing this point up again and again and again and just sort of like, repeating myself, but it's because out of all the bearers of the Rings of Power, Galadriel is the only one that has actually been there. She spent a great deal of time there. Now, Tolkien never quite came up with a perfect origin for Galadriel, because Galadriel was a character that was created specifically for the Lord of the Rings. The same thing with her husband Celeborn. And he realized that in writing the prequel, in writing his most important work, that he had to include them. Because in creating such old and ancient and wise characters as Galadriel and Celeborn, that there was no way that they could not have a part in the Silmarillion. So what to do, And he came up with a lot of different things. He really, really wanted Galadriel to be a major, major character in the Silmarillion. And if you've ever read the book, you know that she's not. She's mentioned a few times. She is there at the first kinslaying, though she doesn't take part in it. She really doesn't like Feanor. She goes with her uncle Fingolf, and they walk across the Helcaraxa for years to reach Middle-earth. She goes to Doriath with Celeborn that's where she meets Celeborn. That wasn't a mistake, though. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. She goes to Doriath. She stays there with Thingol and Melian. She learns magic. She marries Celeborn. And then before the First Age ends, before the War of Wrath, her and Celeborn just sort of exit stage east. They go over the mountains to Eriador, and even over that, over the Misty Mountains to Rovanion, and they come to Lothlorien and they stay there. And, we learned a bit more about them in Unfinished Tales, but what's really interesting here is that's it. She's not a main character in the Silmarillion. We have elves that we can consider to be main characters, like Feanor and Fingolfin and Turgon, but not Galadriel. He was very dissatisfied. She learns Lembas bread from Melian. It's possible she already knew that, and she probably learned it from Yavanna, because there is only elvish women are allowed to learn the art of making lembas, and the women that are allowed to do so are called Yavanaldil. So Yavanaldil, children of Yavanna. So she probably already knew lembas. As a matter of fact, it's safe to say that lembas is probably what sustained the elves on their trip across the Helcaraxa, because if you remember, those elves, they left Eldamar thinking that they were going to take a ship across the sea. They didn't think that there was going to be a kinslaying and that they were going to have to walk across the polar ice cap, for 27 years. So for them to have the provisions to survive that, and not all of them did survive it, they had to have had lembas, actually. So she probably already knew that, but I think what she learned from Melian was probably how to make what we call the Mirror of Galadriel, which we're going to, that's the next chapter, which we're getting to very shortly here. But the magic, the arts, the secret techniques, Tolkien was not satisfied with Galadriel's role in the Silmarillion. And when he died, he was in the process of writing a greater part for her in the Silmarillion, but unfortunately he died. And when his son had to cobble together the Silmarillion from all these different stories and all these different drafts, and he did a wonderful job, there was too many different accounts of Galadriel's origin, and they all conflicted with each other. So he didn't put them into the Silmarillion. He put them into Unfinished Tales. And we learned that there was this other sort of thought that Celeborn was not a Sindar elf living in Doriath, that he was one of the Falmari who lived in Alcalande, and that she lived in Alcalande, and that she was not traveling with the host of Feanor and Fingolfin, but that they came upon them, and that she fought against them and then pursued them, and that's why she came to Middle-earth, and that she didn't walk across the Helcaraxa, that she had her own ship that she took across with her husband, who was the prince of the Falmari. And this is not considered canon. It's considered sort of an alternate idea that he had. But it is really interesting, and I wish he would have been able to flesh it out a little bit more. No matter what, her husband's still older than her. He's still a Teleran elf. Whether he's Sindar or Falmar is sort of, beside the point. But there were a lot of different ideas for Galadriel that unfortunately didn't make it into the main stories. But because she is from the Undying Lands, because she is older than the sun and the moon, because she did see the light of the two trees, and she knew what it was like in Tirion upon Tuna, she knew what it was like in Alcalande, she knew what it was like in Valinor, she knew what it was like in Tol Eressëa, she knew how to use her ring better than anybody else, better than Gil-galad even, and he was the High King, because he was born in Middle-earth. He was Ondofr's son, and I know that in Unfinished Tales and in the Silmarillion he said he was Finrod's son, which is amazing if he was Finrod's son, because that would make him, Galadriel's nephew. But Finrod didn't have any children. Tolkien had changed his mind about that. Christopher made a mistake, essentially. He corrected it in the book The Peoples of Middle-earth. But let's continue on here. Let's see. The others... Oh, I read that part already, sorry. He turned and saw that Sam was now standing beside him, looking round with a puzzled expression and rubbing his eyes, as if he were not sure that he was awake. "It's sunlight and bright daylight enough," he said. "I thought the elves were all for moon and stars, but this is more elvish than anything I ever heard tell of. I feel as if I was inside a song, if you take my meaning." Haldir looked at them, and he seemed indeed to take the meaning of both thought and word. He smiled. "You feel the power of the Lady of the Galadrim," he said. "Would it please you to climb with me up Caran Amroth?" They followed him as he stepped lightly up the grass-clad slopes. Though he walked and breathed, and about him living leaves and flowers was stirred by the same cool wind as fanned his face, Frodo felt as if he were in a timeless land that did not fade or change or fall into forgetfulness. Now there's Moogle. Okay. I needed you to post a Discord link, but don't worry, I got one from the YouTube chat, Moogle. Thank you. When he had gone and passed again into the outer world, still Frodo the Wanderer from the Shire would walk there upon the grass among Elenor and Nimrodel and fair Lothlorien. They entered the circle of white trees. As they did, so the south wind blew upon Caran Amroth and sighed among the branches. Frodo stood still, hearing far off great seas upon beaches that had long ago been washed away, and sea-birds crying whose race had perished from the earth. Haldir had gone on and was now climbing to the high flet. As Frodo prepared to follow him, he laid his hand upon the tree beside the ladder. Never before had he been so suddenly and so keenly aware of the feel and texture of a tree's skin, and of the life within it. He felt a delight in the wood and the touch of it. Neither as a forester nor as a carpenter. It was the delight of the living tree itself. Now I have to comment on this, because this is big. Now, somewhere out there in the Undying Lands, in Valinor, there is one of the Valar. Her name is Yavanna, and she's probably crying right now. And I mean crying real tears of joy. Yavanna created the trees. All of the Valar created something. Varda created the stars. Ulmo created the seas, They all created something, Even Melkor created things. They were not good things, but they created dragons and volcanoes and things like that, Now, what's really interesting here is there is a chapter in the Silmarillion called Of Aule and Yavanna. Aule created the dwarves. Yavanna created the trees. And when Aule created the dwarves, this really bothered Yavanna. Now, Yavanna is his wife. They're a married couple. They're happily married. They still bicker a little bit. But, because even angels get married and bicker with each other, Yavanna really didn't like that there would be so many different types of people in the world that would cut down her trees and use them for their own ends, that would see them as a resource, as just a way of obtaining wood. And this is why the Ents were created, because the trees need protection. The trees are just as alive as anything. They have souls. We saw this in the Old Forest, and we'll see it more when we get to Fangorn Forest and all that. But with the Huorns, the trees that can walk and that eat the orcs at Helm's Deep. But what we're seeing here is something that would make Yavanna just cry tears of joy. I'm going to read you this part again. Never before had he been so suddenly and so keenly aware of the feel and texture of a tree's skin and of the life within it. He felt a delight in wood and the touch of it, neither as forester nor as carpenter. It was the delight of the living tree itself. Yavanna gets upset that there's going to be a third race that is going to cut down her trees. We had the elves and the men. They're not around yet, but she knows they're coming. And now these dwarves, too. And she goes to Manwë and she says, look, could we do something about this? Why can't my children be appreciated for what they are and not what they could be what could be created from their flesh? And so Manwë does what Manwë does. He prays on it. He talks to God, and God answers him. And Manwë repeats God's word back to Yavanna and says, I heard you the first time. When we sang the song that created the universe, you sang of the protectors of the trees. You think I didn't hear you? I heard you. Don't worry. I got you covered. And that's why we have Ents. Now, the extinct birds thing is really interesting, Chewy. I'm glad you brought that up, because we hear about this a lot of birds especially, but creatures of a long-forgotten time. Now, the creatures that the Nazgul rode on, in the movies, they look kind of like dragons, or at least draconian, but the way that Tolkien described them was that they were birds. They were naked birds. They didn't have feathers, but they were birds. And he described them as sort of this, lost thing, a creature of an earlier time. Lothlorien has been there for a long time, but it's only been in this state since the Second Age. The Rings of Power were made in the Second Age. The Elisar was the Second Age. The works of Celebrimbor that were given to Galadriel to preserve her realm. What's really interesting here is this is just a metaphor. Frodo's like, I feel like I've stepped back in time to the First Age. He hasn't literally stepped back in time. Now, in an earlier draft, Tolkien played with the idea that Lothlorien is frozen in time, and he decided against that. and he revised the text sort of at the last second, that it's not literally frozen in time, that it just feels like it is, because that's the way the Undying Lands are. The Undying Lands, your life doesn't go by like that because of the holy rays of the Valar. It just feels like that. Time still flows the same. It just feels differently. And it's going to be sort of explained by Aragorn when he has a conversation with Sam after they leave Lothlorien. Okay, this is the very end of this chapter, and I think we will have time for the next chapter. The next chapter is the Mirror of Galadriel, and it's not a long one. So we're going to get through 2 chapters today. Lothlorien's a long chapter, and then the Mirror of Galadriel's not so long, and a lot happens there, though. And notice also that it's not just birds, though. It's specifically seabirds. And he's nowhere near the sea. And Haldir already brought this point up, that none of the elves here, except for Galadriel and Celeborn, have ever seen the sea. And we're going to get into it a little bit in the 2 Towers about the meaning of what it really means for an elf who has never seen the sea to see it. But let's continue on here. Haldir had gone on and was now climbing up the high flat. As Frodo... Oh, I already read that part, sorry. As he stepped out at last upon the lofty platform, Haldir took his hand and turned him toward the south. "Look this way first," he said. Frodo looked and saw, still at some distance, a hill of many mighty trees, or a city of green towers. Which it was he could not tell. Out of it seemed to him that the power and light came that held all the land in sway. He longed suddenly to fly like a bird, and rest in the green city. Then he looked eastward and saw all the land of Lorien running down the pale gleam of Anduin, the great river. He lifted his eyes across the river, and all the light went out, and he was back again in the world he knew. Beyond the river the land appeared flat and empty, formless and vague, until far away it rose again like a wall, dark and drear. The sun that lay on Lothlorien had no power to enlighten the shadows of that distant height. "There lies the fastness of southern Mirkwood," said Haldir. "It is clad in a forest of dark fir where the trees strive one against another, and their branches rot and wither. In the midst, upon a stony height, stands Dol Guldur, where long the hidden enemy had his dwelling. We fear now that it is inhabited again, and with power 7-fold. A black cloud lies often over it of late. In this high place you may see the 2 powers that are opposed to one another, and ever they strive now in thought, but whereas the light perceives the very heart of the darkness, its own secret has not yet been discovered, not yet." He turned and climbed swiftly down, and they followed him. At the hill's foot Frodo found Aragorn, standing still and silent as a tree, but in his hand was a small golden bloom of Elenor, and a light was in his eyes. He was wrapped in some fair memory, and as Frodo looked at him he knew that he beheld things as they once had been in the same place, for the grim years were removed from the face of Aragorn, and he seemed clothed in white, a young lord, tall and fair, and he spoke words in the elvish tongue to one whom Frodo could not see. "Arwen Vanamelda Namaria," he said, and then he drew a breath, and returning out of his thought he looked at Frodo and smiled. "Here is the heart of elvendom on earth," he said, "and here my heart dwells ever, unless there be a light beyond the dark roads that we still must tread, you and I. Come with me." And taking Frodo's hand in his, he left the hill of Caranamroth, and came there never again as living man. So, yeah, he's sort of wrapped up in this memory because this is the exact spot where he proposed to Arwen on Caranamroth. And it's mentioned, he never comes back. He never does come back to this spot, which is really interesting because she does, because that's where Arwen dies. After Aragorn is gone, she sticks around for like a year, and she says goodbye to Eldarion, her son, and to Eldarion's sisters, and she travels to Lothlorien and dies there. And she's the only one there. There's nobody there. It's already completely abandoned. And it's really sort of sad and bittersweet. But yeah, Aragorn never came back there. You would think that they would travel there from time to time just to see it. But there is a sadness there because Galadriel would no longer be there. Even Celeborn didn't sail to the west until later on, but he stopped living in Lothlorien. He started living in Mirkwood for a while, and then he got tired of that, and he lived in Rivendell for a while, and then eventually, of course, he joined his wife in the Undying Lands. Okay, so, yeah, let's move on. We have Book 2, Chapter 7, The Mirror of Galadriel. I believe we will have enough time to get through this. Well, we're going to go until I finish this chapter. This is not a long chapter. A lot happens, but it's not a long chapter. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, and the shadows were deepening in the woods when they went on again. Their paths now went into thickets, where the dusk had already gathered. Night came beneath the trees as they walked, and the elves uncovered their silver lamps. Suddenly they came out into the open again, and found themselves under a pale evening sky, pricked by a few early stars. There was a wide treeless space before them, running in a great circle and bending away on either hand. Beyond it was a deep foss, lost in a soft shadow. But the grass upon its brink was green, as if it glowed still in memory of the sun that had gone. Upon the further side there rose to a great height a green wall encircling a green hill thronged with mallow trees taller than any they had yet seen in all the land. Their height could not be guessed, but they stood up in the twilight like living towers. In their many-tiered branches, amid the ever-moving leaves, countless lights were gleaming, green and gold and silver. Haldir turned toward the company. "Welcome to Caras, Galadhon," he said. "Here is the city of Galadrim, where dwell the Lord Celeborn and Galadriel, the Lady of Lorien. But we cannot enter here, for the gates do not look northward. We must go around to the southern side, and the way is not short, for the city is great." There was a road paved with white stone, running to the outer brink on the foss. Along this they went westward, with their city ever climbing up like a green cloud upon their left. And as the night deepened, more light sprang forth, until all the hills seemed to fire with stars. There they came at last to a white bridge, and crossing, found the great gates to the city. They faced southwest, set between the ends of the encircling wall that here overlapped, and they were tall and strong, and hung with many lamps. Haldir knocked and spoke, and the gates opened soundlessly, but of guards Frodo could see no sign. The travelers passed within, and the gates shut behind them. They were in a deep lane between the ends of the wall, and passing quickly through it they entered the city of the trees. No folk could they see, nor hear any feet upon the paths, but there were many voices about them and in the air above. Far away up on the hill they could hear the sound of singing falling down from on high like a soft rain upon leaves. They went along many paths and climbed many stairs until they came to the high places and saw before them amid a wide lawn a fountain shimmering. It was lit by silver lamps that swung from the boughs of trees, and it fell into a basin of silver, from which a white stream spilled. Upon the south side of the lawn there stood the mightiest of all the trees. Its great smooth bole gleamed like grey silk, and up it towered, until its first branches far above opened their huge limbs into shadowy clouds of leaves. Beside it a broad white ladder stood, and at its foot 3 elves were seated. They sprang up as the travellers approached, and Frodo saw that they were tall, and clad in grey mail, and from their shoulders hung long white cloaks. "Here dwell Celeborn and Galadriel," said Haldir. "It is their wish that you should ascend and speak to them." One of the elf wardens then blew a clear note on a small horn, and it was answered 3 times from far above. "I will go first," said Haldir. "Let Frodo come next, and with him Legolas. The others may follow as they wish. It is a long climb for those that are not accustomed to such stairs, but you may rest along the way." Oh, what chapter? We are on Book 2, Chapter 7, The Mirror of Galadriel. If you are reading a single volume of The Fellowship of the Ring, it is page 369 that I'm currently reading here. As he climbed slowly up, Frodo passed many flets, some on one side, some on another, and some set about the bole of the tree so that the ladder passed through them. At a great height above the ground he came to a wide talon, like the deck of a great ship. On it was built a house, so large that almost it would have served for a hall of men upon the earth. He entered, behind Haldir, and found that he was in a chamber of oval shape, in the midst of which grew the trunk of the great mallow, now tapering towards its crown, and yet making still a pillar of wide girth. The chamber was filled with a soft light. Its walls were green and silver, and its roof of gold. Many elves were seated there, on 2 chairs beneath the bole of the tree, and canopied by a living bough there sat, side by side, Celeborn and Galadriel. They stood up to greet their guests, after the manner of elves, even those who were accounted mighty kings. Very tall they were, and the lady no less tall than the lord, and they were grave and beautiful. They were clad wholly in white, and the hair of the lady was of deep gold, and the hair of the lord Celeborn was of silver, long and bright. But no sign of age was upon them, unless it were in the depths of their eyes, for these were keen as lances in the starlight, and yet profound, the wells of deep memory. Now, to just pause here, and to say that it's mentioned that they're very, very tall. Galadriel is, well, first of all, the elves that came from the First Age were just really tall. The tallest person ever to walk Middle-earth was an elf by the name of Ilu Thingol, and Celeborn is sort of his great grandnephew, you know. And Ilu Thingol was said to be 9 feet tall. Also, very tall, Elendil. Elendil is, of course, Aragorn's ancestor about 60 generations back. He was over 8 feet tall himself. Now, most of the elves were very tall in this time. It was not unusual for them to be 7 feet tall. And as with mortals, generally speaking, the men are generally taller. But in the case of Galadriel, she's as tall as any elf man. And it's interesting because she has a few different names. All elves have a few different names. There's usually a name that is given to the elf by their mother, and another name that is given by their father. And then sometimes there's a third name that either they come up with themselves or somebody gives it to them. And Galadriel is actually her third name. Galadriel means maiden crowned with golden flowers. And what's really interesting is my friend Laurel, she is also a Tolkien scholar, and she once wanted me to translate her name into Elvish, into Quenya Elvish. And if I'm just going to switch over to here real quick, this is the scene where I know Matt is there frozen because of the issues we had with his webcam, so just ignore that. You can see under my name is my name in Elvish, Erolisse Oronti, and you can see I came up with a name for Sid and a name for Matt there. So she asked me to do it, and I came up with it, and it was, and I said it was, I actually don't remember off the top of my head what her Elvish name was, but Laurel is a crown of flowers, and so I gave her a name like that, and I said, it was Almariel. I just remembered, it was Almariel. And I said, your name would be Almariel, but if you wanted to emphasize the fact that you're blonde, it could be Galadriel. And Jesus says, oh my God, I've wanted to be Galadriel since I was a little girl. But she stuck with Almariel because she didn't want to use the name of an already existing character, And I do this for people when they ask me nicely, and sometimes it takes me a little while to come back to them. But if anybody wants to know their name in Elvish, I'm the guy to come to. But anyway, what's really interesting here is that the name that, I'm going to have to look it up actually because I don't have it in front of me right now and I don't remember it, but the name that Galadriel's father gave her, like I said, the name Galadriel actually came from Celeborn. He's the one that called her Galadriel. Let me bring up my language notes here on Galadriel. She had several other names, obviously. Most elves do have at least 2 names, if not 3 or more. So, let's see. Okay. So, her father called her Artanis, and that's noblewoman. It was her mother, though, who gave her the name Nerwin. And Nerwin, see, usually what happens with elves is when they're born, their father gives them a name right away, right when they're born. And the mother gives them a name a little bit later. So usually the father name is sort of something that reflects their family or who they're related to. In her case, she's a noblewoman, kind of a princess later on, but a noblewoman, so she's given the name Artanis. The mother name, because it's given later, reflects more of the personality or physical traits that the elf takes on. So the mother called her Nerwin, which actually means man-maiden, where she is a maiden, but she is as tall as a man, because she just shot right up, you know what I mean? So it's interesting to note that even here, yeah, it's mentioning Galadriel is a towering, towering woman. Also, it's important to mention also the colors involved here, that gold and silver. She has gold hair. Her husband has silver hair. Celeborn even means silver. Celeb is silver, so Celeborn, silver-haired. And that's once again the colors of the two trees, Laurelin and Telperion, the sun and the moon, or the sun and the stars and the moon, if you want to get right into it. Let's continue along here. Haldir led Frodo before them, and the Lord welcomed him in their own tongue. The Lady Galadriel said no word, but looked long upon his face. "Sit now beside my chair, Frodo of the Shire," said Celeborn. "When all have come, we will speak together." Each of the companions he greeted courteously by name as they entered. "Welcome, Aragorn, son of Arathorn," he said. "It is 38 years of the world outside since you came to this land, and those years lie heavy on you. But the end is near, for good or ill. Here lay aside your burden for a while. Welcome, son of Thranduil. Too seldom do my kindred journey hither from the north. Welcome, Gimli, son of Gloin. It is long indeed that we saw one of Durin's folk in Caras Galadhon. But today we have broken our long law. May it be a sign that though the world is now dark, better days are at hand, and that friendship shall be renewed between our peoples." Gimli bowed low. Now, by the way, if you're wondering why there's a third chair, because obviously, they're sort of the rulers here. They reject the title of king and queen, but they go by lord and lady, and they have their two chairs. There's a third chair that Frodo sits in. That was Arwen's chair, in case you're wondering, because Arwen lived with her grandparents for a very long time. And in case you didn't know, yes, Galadriel is Arwen's grandmother. When all the guests were seated before his chair, the Lord looked at them again. "Here there are 8, he said. 9 were to set out, so said the messages. But maybe there has been some change of counsel that we have not heard. Elrond is far away, and darkness gathers between us, and all this year the shadows have grown longer." "Nay, there was no change of counsel," said the Lady Galadriel, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clear and musical, but deeper than a woman's wont. "Gandalf the Grey set out with the company, but he did not pass the borders of this land. Now tell us where he is, for I much desire to speak with him again. But I cannot see him from afar unless he comes within the fences of Lothlorien. A grey mist is about him, and the ways of his feet and his mind are hidden from me." "Alas," said Aragorn, "Gandalf the Grey fell into shadow. He remained in Moria and did not escape." At these words all the elves in the hall cried aloud in grief and amazement. "These are evil tidings," said Celeborn, "the most evil that have been spoken here in long years, full of grievous deeds." He turned to Haldir. "Why has nothing of this been told to me before?" he asked in the elven tongue. "We have not spoken to Haldir of our deeds or our purpose," said Legolas. "At first we were weary, and danger was too close behind, and afterward we almost forgot our grief for a time, as we walked in gladness on the fair paths of Lorien." "Yet our grief is great, and our loss cannot be mended," said Frodo. "Gandalf was our guide, and he led us through Moria, and when our escape seemed beyond hope he saved us, and he fell." "Tell us now the full tale," said Celeborn. Then Aragorn recounted all that had happened upon the pass of Caradhras, and the days that followed, and he spoke of Balin in his book, and the fight in the chamber of Mazarbul, and the fire, and the narrow bridge, and the coming of the terror. "An evil of the ancient world, it seemed, such as I have never seen before," said Aragorn. "It was both a shadow and a flame, strong and terrible. "It was a Balrog of Morgoth," said Legolas. "Of all the elf-banes the most deadly, save the one who sits in the dark tower. Indeed, I saw upon the bridge that which haunts our darkest dreams." Oh, I'm sorry, this is Gimli. "Indeed, I saw upon the bridge that haunts our darkest dreams, I saw Durin's bane," said Gimli in a low voice, and dread was in his eyes. "Alas," said Celeborn, "we have long feared that under Caras a terror slept. But had I known that the dwarves had stirred up this evil in Moria again, I would have forbidden you to pass the northern borders, you and all that went with you. And if it were possible, one would say that at the last Gandalf fell from wisdom into folly, going needlessly into the net of Moria." "He would be rash indeed that said that thing," said Galadriel gravely. I love this because she's telling her husband to shut up. He starts off so nice. He's so nice to Gimli, and he's like, maybe this is a sign of better days to come. Then as soon as he hears the Balrog, oh my God, I shouldn't have let you guys in here, and he sort of says that Gandalf kind of had it coming, how dare he go into that bad neighborhood. Now, we could forgive Celeborn a little bit, but he's still being racist. His history, like I said, if we go by the more accepted history, in the Silmarillion, he is, as I said, sort of the great-grandnephew of Eleuthingel. And Eleuthingel was killed by dwarves. So he's a little salty about it, still, after all this time. This led to the fall of Doriath. But, of course, Eleuthingel sort of, I wouldn't say that he had it coming, but he was becoming a problem. And his wife, Melian, was trying to rein him in. And Galadriel is somebody that learned from Melian a great deal, and she's sort of being a little bit quicker to the punch here and saying, well, if you said that, that would be some pretty stupid stuff to say. Let's see, where were we? Needless were none of the deeds of Gandalf in life. Those that followed him knew not his mind and cannot report his full purpose. But however it may be with a guide, the followers are blameless. Do not repent of your welcome of the dwarf. It is our folk that have been exiled long and far from Lothlorien, who of the Galadrim, even Celeborn the Wise, would pass nigh and would not wish to look upon their ancient home, though it has become an abode of dragons. Dark is the water of Kelazarum, and cold are the springs of Kibble-Nala, and fair were the many-pillared halls of Khazad-dûm in the elder days before the fall of mighty kings beneath the stone. She looked down upon Gimli, who sat glowering and sad, and she smiled. And the dwarf, hearing the names given in his own ancient tongue, looked up and met her eyes, and it seemed to him that he looked suddenly into the heart of an enemy, and saw there love and understanding. Wonder came into his face, and then he smiled in answer. He rose clumsily and bowed in dwarf fashion, saying, Yet more fair is the living land of Lorien, and the Lady Galadriel is above all the jewels that lie beneath the earth. Oh, the BBC radio play is fantastic. That's a great choice to listen to, Last Davros. There was a silence. At length Celeborn spoke again. I did not know that your plight was so evil, he said. Let Gimli forget my harsh words. I spoke in the trouble of my heart. I will do what I can to aid you, each according to his wish and need, but especially that one of the little folk who bears the burden. Your quest is known to us, said Galadriel, looking at Frodo. But we will not here speak of it more openly. Yet not in vain will it prove, maybe, that you came to this land seeking aid, as Gandalf himself plainly purposed. For the Lord of the Galadrim is accounted the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth, and a giver of gifts beyond the power of kings. He has dwelt in the west since the days of dawn, and I have dwelt with him years uncounted, for ere the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin, I pass over the mountains, and together through the ages of the world we have fought the long defeat. That's exactly true. He's not from that rabble. Exactly true. He's a dwarf of Erebor, which in his heart is a dwarf of Moria. He's not from Nogrod. You're right. Now, this is really interesting. I mentioned earlier how he, Celeborn could be one of two different people. And this actually hints towards the fact that he was the Falmar prince and not, from Doriath. And then you'd wonder why he doesn't like dwarves then, but maybe he lived in Doriath for a while anyway. But she says here, very clearly, the Lord of the Galadrim is accounted the wisest of the elves in Middle-earth, citation needed, and a great giver of gifts beyond the power of kings. He has dwelt in the West since the days of dawn. When she says West, it's a capital W, the Undying Lands, in the days of dawn, the first sunrise. So this is suggesting that he came over the sea with her. It is the more accepted origin that he was born in Middle-earth, but she's sort of saying otherwise here. I it was who first summoned the White Council, and if my designs had not gone amiss, it would have been governed by Gandalf the Grey, and then mayhap things would have gone otherwise. But even now there is hope left. I will not give you counsel saying to do this or do that, but not in doing or contriving, nor of choosing between this course and another can I avail, but only in knowing what was and is, and in part also what shall be. But this I say to you, your quest stands upon the edge of a knife. Stray but a little, and it will fall, to the ruin of all. Yet hope remains while the company is true. Now I have to pause again and mention that she says here that she was the one who started the White Council, and this is true. And she wanted Gandalf to be in charge. She started it when it was just elves, right? And then the wizards come, and she's like, these guys are from the West. They're clearly angels. And this guy here, this Gandalf, he's the smartest one in the room. I'm going to make him the one in charge. And then Saruman threw a hissy fit about it. I'm the one in charge. I'm his boss. How could he be the one in charge? And Gandalf's sort of like, yeah, whatever. I'm not having this argument right now. And Galadriel ceded the leadership of the White Council to Saruman the White. Now, she says if she had had her way, it would have been Gandalf. But of course, if that happened, yes, things would have been different, and the ring never would have been destroyed. It had to happen this way. Let's continue on. And with that word she held them with her eyes, and in silence looked searchingly at each of them in turn. None save Legolas and Aragorn could long endure her glance. Sam quickly blushed and hung his head. At length the Lady Galadriel released them from her eyes, and she smiled. Do not let your hearts be troubled, she said. Tonight you shall sleep in peace. They then sighed and felt suddenly weary, as those who had been questioned long and deeply, though no words had been spoken openly. Go now, said Celeborn. You are worn with sorrow and much toil. Even if your quest did not concern us closely, you should have refuge in this city until you were healed and refreshed. Now you shall rest, and we will not speak of your further road for a while. That night the company slept upon the ground, much to the satisfaction of the hobbits. The elves spread for them a pavilion among the trees near the fountain, and in it they lay soft couches, and then speaking words of peace with fair elvish voices they left them. For a little while the travellers talked of their night before in the tree-tops, and of their day's journey, and of the lord and lady, for they had not yet the heart to look further back. "What did you blush for, Sam?" said Pippin. "You soon broke down. Anyone would have thought you had a guilty conscience. I hope it was nothing worse than a wicked plot to steal one of my blankets." "I never thought no such thing," answered Sam, in no mood for jest. "If you want to know, I felt as if I hadn't got nothing on, and I didn't like it. She seemed to be looking inside me and asking me what I would do if she gave me the chance of flying back home to the Shire to a nice little hole with and a bit of garden of my own." "That's funny," said Merry. "Almost exactly what I felt myself, only, well, I don't think I'll say more," he ended lamely. All of them, it seemed, had fared alike. Each of them had felt that he was offered a choice between a shadow full of fear that lay ahead, and something that he greatly desired. Clear before his mind it lay, and to get it, he had only to turn aside from the road and leave the quest and the war against Sauron to others. And it seemed to me, too," said Gimli, "that my choice will remain secret, and known only to myself." "To me it seemed exceedingly strange," said Boromir. "Maybe it was only a test, that she thought to read our minds for our own good purpose. But almost I should have said that she was tempting us, and offering what she pretended to have the power to give. It need not be said that I refused to listen. The men of Minas Tirith are true to their word. But what he thought that the lady had offered him, Boromir did not tell. And as for Frodo, he would not speak, though Boromir pressed him with questions. She held you long in her gaze, ring-bearer, he said. Yes, said Frodo, but whatever came into my mind, then I will keep there. I'll have a care, said Boromir. I do not feel too sure of this elvish lady and her purposes. Speak no evil of the Lady Galadriel, said Aragorn sternly. You know not what you say. There is in her, and in this land, no evil, unless a man bring it hither himself. Then let him beware. But tonight I shall sleep without fear for the first time since I left Rivendell, and I may sleep deep and forget for a while my grief. I am weary in body and in heart. He cast himself down upon his couch and fell at once into a long sleep. The others soon did the same, and no sound or dream disturbed their slumber. When they woke, they found that the light of day was broad upon the lawn before the pavilion, and the fountain rose and fell glittering in the sun. They remained some days in Lothlorien, so far as they could tell or remember. All the while they dwelt there, the sun shone clear, save for a gentle rain that fell at times and passed away, leaving all things fresh and clean. The air was cool and soft, as if it were early spring, yet they felt about them the deep and thoughtful quiet of winter. It seemed to them that they did little but eat and drink and rest and walk among the trees, and it was enough. They had not seen the lord or lady again, and they had little speech with any of the elven folk, for few of these that spoke any but their own sylvan tongue. Haldir had bidden them farewell and gone back again to the fences of the north, where great watch was now kept since the tidings of Moria that the company had brought. Legolas was away much among the Galadrim, and after the first night he did not sleep with the other companions, though he returned to eat and talk with them. Often he took Gimli with him when he went abroad in the land, and the others wondered at this change. Now, as the companions sat or walked together, they spoke of Gandalf, and all the things each they had known and seen of him came clear before their minds. As they were healed of hurt and weariness of body, the grief of their loss grew more keen. Often they heard nearby elvish voices singing, and knew that they were making songs of lamentation for his fall, and they caught his name among the sweet, sad words that they could not understand. Mithrandir, Mithrandir, sang the elves, O pilgrim grey, for so they loved to call him. But if Legolas was with the company, he would not interpret the songs for them, saying that he had not the skill, and that for him the grief was still too near, a matter for tears, and not yet for song. It was Frodo who first put something of his sorrow into halting words. He was seldom moved to make song or rhyme. Even in Rivendell he had listened and had not sung himself, though his memory was stored with many things that others had made before him. But now, as he sat beside the fountain in Lorien, and heard about him the voices of the elves, his thought took shape in a song that seemed fair to him. And when he tried to repeat it to Sam, only snatches remained, faded as handful of withered leaves. When evening in the Shire was grey, his footsteps on the hill were heard. Before the dawn he went away on a journey long without a word. From Wilderland to western shore, from northern waste to southern hill, through dragon lair and hidden door, on darkling woods he walked at will. With dwarf and hobbit, elves and men, with mortal and immortal folk, with bird and bough and beast and den, in their own secret tongues he spoke. A deadly sword, a healing hand, a back that bent beneath its load, a trumpet voice, a burning brand, a weary pilgrim on the road. A lord of wisdom throned he sat, swift in anger, quick to laugh, an old man in a battered hat, who leaned upon a thorny staff. He stood upon the bridge alone, and fire and shadow both defied. His staff was broken on the stone, and Khazad-dûm his wisdom died. "Why, you'll be beating Mr. Bilbo next," said Sam. "No, I'm afraid not," said Frodo. "But that is the best I can do yet." "Well, Mr. Frodo, if you do have another go, I hope you'll say a word about his fireworks," said Sam. "Something like this. The finest rockets ever seen. They burst in stars of blue and green, or after thunder golden showers came falling like a rain of flowers." "Oh, that doesn't do them any justice by a long road. No, I'll leave that to you, Sam, or perhaps to Bilbo. But, well, I can't talk of it any more. I can't bear to think of bringing the news to him." One evening Frodo and Sam were walking together in the cool twilight. Both of them felt restless again. On Frodo suddenly the shadow of parting had fallen, He knew somehow that the time was very near when he must leave Lothlorien. "What do you think of elves now, Sam?" he said. "I asked you the same question once before. It seems a very long while ago, but you have seen more of them since then." "I have indeed," said Sam. "And I reckon there's elves and elves. They're all elvish enough, but they're not the same. Now these folk aren't wanderers or homeless, and seem a bit nearer to the likes of us. They seem to belong here, more even than hobbits do in the Shire. Whether they've made the land or the land's made them, it's hard to say, if you take my meaning. It's wonderfully quiet here. Nothing seems to be going on, and nobody seems to want it to. If there's any magic about it, it's right down deep, or I can't lay my hands on it in a manner of speaking." "You can see it and feel it everywhere," said Frodo. "Well," said Sam, "you can't see nobody working it, no fireworks like poor old Gandalf used to show. I wonder we don't see nothing of the Lord and Lady in all these days. I fancy now that she could do some wonderful things if she had a mind. I'd dearly love to see some elf magic, Mr. Frodo." "I wouldn't," said Frodo. "I am content, and I don't miss Gandalf's fireworks, but his bushy eyebrows and his quick temper and his voice." "You're right," said Sam. "And don't think I'm finding fault. I've often wanted to see a bit of magic like what it tells of in old tales, but I've never heard of a better land than this. It's like being at home and on a holiday at the same time, if you understand me. I don't want to leave here. At the same, I'm beginning to feel as if we've got to go on. Then we'd best get it over. It's the job that's never started that takes longest to finish, as my old gaffer used to say, and I don't reckon that these folk can do much more than help us magic or no. It's when we leave this land that we shall miss Gandalf worse, I'm thinking." "I'm afraid that's only too true, Sam," said Frodo. "Yet I hope very much that before we leave we shall see the Lady of the Elves again." Even as he spoke they saw, as if she came in to answer their words, the Lady Galadriel approaching. Tall and white and fair she walked beneath the trees. She spoke no word, but beckoned to them. Turning aside, she led them toward the southern slopes of the hills of Caras Galadhon, and passing through a high green hedge they came to an enclosed garden. No trees grew there, and it lay open to the sky. The evening star had risen, and was shining with white fire above the western woods. Down a long flight of steps the lady went down into a deep green hollow, through which ran murmuring the silver stream that issued from the fountain on the hill. At the bottom, upon a low pedestal carved like a branching tree, stood a basin of silver, wide and shallow, and beside it stood a silver ewer. I need to drink water, so just bear with me here. What I really need is that Mirror that Gandalf carried. That would be quite handy in a situation like this. With water from the stream, Galadriel filled the basin to the brim, and breathed on it. And when the water was still again, she spoke. "Here is the Mirror of Galadriel," she said. "I have brought you here so that you may look in it, if you will." The air was very still, and the dell was dark, and the elf lady beside him was tall and pale. "What shall we look for, and what shall we see?" asked Frodo, filled with awe. "Many things I can command the mirror to reveal," she answered, "and to some I can show what they desire to see. But the mirror will also show things unbidden, and those are often stranger and more profitable than things which we wish to behold. What you will see if you leave the mirror free to work I cannot tell, for it shows things that were, and things that are, and things that yet may be. But which is it that he sees? Even the wisest cannot always tell. Do you wish to look?" Frodo did not answer. "And you," she said, turning to Sam, "for this is what your folk would call magic, I believe, though I do not understand clearly what they mean. And they seem also to use the same word of the deceits of the enemy. But this, if you will, is the magic of Galadriel. Did you not say you wish to see elf magic?" "I did," said Sam, trembling a little between fear and curiosity. "I'll have a peep, lady, if you're willing." "And I'll not mind a glimpse of what's going on at home," he said in an aside to Frodo. "It seems a terrible long time that I've been away. But there, like as not, I'll only see the stars or something that I won't understand." "Like as not," said the lady with a gentle laugh. "But come, you shall look and see what you may. Do not touch the water." Sam climbed up to the foot of the pedestal and leaned over the basin. The water looked hard and dark. Stars were reflected in it. "There's only stars as I thought," he said. Then he gave a low gasp, for the stars went out. As if a dark veil had been withdrawn, the mirror grew grey and then clear. There was sun shining, and the branches of trees were waving and tossing in the wind. But before Sam could make up his mind what it was that he saw, the light faded. And now he thought he saw Frodo with a pale face lying fast asleep under a great dark cliff. Then he seemed to see himself going into a dim passage and climbing an endless, winding stair. It came to him suddenly that he was looking urgently for something, but what it was he did not know. Like a dream, the vision shifted and went back, and he saw the trees again. But this time they were not so close, and he could see what was going on. They were not waving in the wind, they were falling, crashing to the ground. I'm going to continue in a moment, but I just want to mention that he's actually seeing the pass at Cirith Ungol, the Cleft of the Spider, and he's looking for something, but he doesn't know what it is. And of course, what's going to happen is that Galadriel is going to give her that little sort of pseudo-Silmaril, the Phial of Galadriel, and that's going to be very, very important at the Cleft of the Spider. "Hi!" cried Sam in an outraged voice. "There's that Ted Sandyman a-cutting down trees he shouldn't. That didn't ought to be felled. It was the avenue beyond the mill that shades the road to Bywater. I wish I could get at Ted and I'd fell him." But now Sam noticed that the old mill had vanished and a large red brick building was being put up where it had stood. Lots of folk were busily at work. There was a tall red chimney nearby. Black smoke seemed to cloud the surface of the mirror. "There's some devilry at work in the Shire," he said. "Elrond knew what he was about when he wanted to send Mr. Merry back." Then suddenly Sam gave a cry and sprang away. "I can't stay here," he said wildly. "I must go home. They've dug up Bagshot Row, and there's the poor old gaffer going down the hill with all the bits of things on a barrow. I must go home." "You cannot go home alone," said the lady. "You do not wish to go home without your master before you looked in the mirror, and yet you knew that evil things might well be happening in the Shire. Remember that the mirror shows many things, and not all have come to pass. Some never come to be unless those that behold the visions turn aside from their path to prevent them. The mirror is dangerous as a guide of deeds." So I like this. She's saying, yes, this thing can show the future, or at least a possible future, but don't change your course based on what you saw there, because that's a really, really bad idea. Sam sat on the ground and put his head in his hands. "I wish I had never come here, and I don't want to see no more magic," he said, and fell silent. After a moment he spoke again thickly, as if struggling with tears. "No, I'll go home by the long road with Mr. Frodo, or not at all," he said. "But I hope I do get back some day. If what I seen turns out true, somebody's going to catch it hot." "Do you now wish to look, Frodo?" said the Lady Galadriel. "You did not wish to see elf magic, and were content." "Do you advise me to look?" asked Frodo. "Oh, hey there, Deborah. Hey. Glad to have you in." We're sort of getting close to wrapping up, but we're just finishing up the chapter, The Mirror of Galadriel. Now, this is interesting because it's very interesting to me that she has Sam look in the mirror first, and I think it's really just because he was so eager to see some magic, whereas Frodo said, "No, I'm not so interested in seeing magic," and she turns to him, sort of like, "Hey, your friend here, he didn't have such a great time looking in the mirror, and you were content and didn't want to look in it. How do you feel about that now?" "I will look," said Frodo, as he climbed on the pedestal and bent over the dark water. At once the mirror cleared, and he saw a twilit land. Mountains loomed dark in the distance against the pale sky. A long grey road wound back out of sight. Far away a figure came slowly down the road, faint and small at first, but growing larger and clearer as it approached. Suddenly Frodo realized that it reminded him of Gandalf. He almost called aloud the wizard's name, and then he saw the figure was clothed not in grey, but in a white that shone faintly in the dusk, and in his hand there was a white staff. The head was so bowed that he could see no face, and presently the figure turned aside round a bend in the road and went out of the mirror's view. Doubt came into Frodo's mind. Was this a vision of Gandalf on one of his many lonely journeys long ago? Or was it Saruman? The vision now changed. Brief and small, but very vivid, he caught a glimpse of Bilbo, walking restlessly about his room. The table was littered with discordant papers. Rain was beating on the windows. Then there was a pause, and after it many swift scenes followed that Frodo, in some way, knew to be parts of a great history in which he had become involved. The mist cleared, and he saw a sight which he had never seen before, but knew at once: the sea. Darkness fell. The sea rose and raged in a great storm. Then he saw again the sun, sinking blood-red into a rack of clouds, the black outline of a tall ship with torn sails riding out of the west. Then a wide river flowing through a populous city. Then a white fortress with 7 towers. And then again a ship with black sails, but now it was morning again. And the water rippled with light, and a banner bearing the emblem of a white tree shone in the sun. A smoke as of fire and battle arose, and again the sun went down in a burning red that faded into a grey mist. And into the mist a small ship passed away, twinkling with lights. It vanished, and Frodo sighed and prepared to draw away. Now, let's... Oh, thank you. Thank you, Santa Cruz. How's it going? And thank you, Jonathan, as well. You can't mention Taco Bell without telling me what you ordered, though. You have to give me the details there and tell me what you ordered. Now, a lot of different things. Frodo sees this cacophony of different images. Let's go through them. So the first thing that he sees is Gandalf the White. He doesn't know that it's Gandalf the White. He wonders, was this Gandalf some other time, or is it Saruman? But we know that it's Gandalf the White. And this is our first sort of foreshadowing of Gandalf's return. Because he's already returned, actually. Now, I mentioned that after he fell, it's 11 days later that he actually dies. But they've been here in Lothlorien for nearly a month. And you're absolutely correct, there, Fusible. It's sort of a trailer of his future story. Absolutely spot on analogy there. And a lot of it is stuff that he's not personally going to see, but is going to happen. So then he sees the sea. And we don't know, this could be anywhere, but from the context, we have to assume this is Belfalas, because he sees the black outline of a tall ship with torn sails riding up out of the west. And then a wide river flowing through a populous city. Now, where do we know a river that flows through a city? That's Osgiliath. And then a white fortress with 7 towers. That's Minas Tirith. And then again a ship with black sails. But the white tree. This is, well, not on the sails. A banner, a standard. This is Aragorn bringing the ships of the Corsairs of Umbars up through the Anduin to Osgiliath, and then riding out to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. And then he sees the Battle of Pelennor Fields. And then he sees a single ship disappearing, his eventual fate to sail to the west. Oh, that sounds really good. I mean, I don't drink soda, but the rest of that sounds really good. I had Taco Bell, what was it, like 4 days ago, something like that. And I had, let's see, what did I have? I had the potato taco, which is really good, and some nachos and a burrito, and a chalupa. There was a chalupa in there. But yeah, I enjoy Taco Bell. I try not to eat it like very, very often, but I do enjoy it. I'm personally of the feeling that any meal is better with tortillas. Whether they're fried up or something's wrapped in a tortilla, every meal is just made better with a tortilla. All right, let's continue on here. But suddenly the mirror went altogether dark as if a hole had opened the world of sight, and Frodo looked into emptiness. In the black abyss there appeared a single eye that slowly grew, until it filled nearly all the mirror. So terrible was it that Frodo stood rooted, unable to cry out or to withdraw his gaze. The eye was rimmed with fire, but was itself glazed, yellow as a cat's, watchful and intent, and the black slit of its pupil opened on a pit, a window into nothing. Then the eye began to rove, searching this way and that, and Frodo knew with certainty and horror that among the many things that it sought, he himself was one. But he also knew that it could not see him, not yet, not unless he willed it. The ring that hung upon its chain about his neck grew heavy, heavier than a great stone, and his head was dragged downward. The mirror seemed to be growing hot, and curls of steam were rising from the water. He was slipping forward. "Do not touch the water," said the Lady Galadriel softly. The vision faded, and Frodo found that he was looking at the cool stars twinkling in the silver basin. He stepped back, shaking all over, and looked at the lady. "I know what it was that you last saw," she said, "for that is also in my mind. Do not be afraid, but do not think that only by singing amid the trees, nor even by the slender arrows of elven bows, is this land of Lothlorien maintained and defended against its enemy. I say to you, Frodo, that even as I speak to you I perceive the Dark Lord, and know his mind, or all that his mind that concerns the elves, and he gropes ever to see me in my thought, but still the door is closed." Now, I was going to mention that fuse blower, but that is absolutely an echo of Tevildo. For anyone who doesn't know, one of the very earliest stories that Tolkien wrote was a story called Beren and Luthien, or as it was originally entitled, The Lay of Leithian. And it was a sort of a long-form prose poem that Tolkien wrote in 1917 when he was in the hospital. He was recovering from trench fever that he had gotten a really bad case of that in the Great War. And his wife was with him, and he started writing several stories. Two others were The Fall of Gondolin and The Children of Hurin. And this is, like I said, this is before he even, thought of The Hobbit. And in The Lay of Leithian, the main villain was a guy that he called Melko. He later amended that to Melkor or Morgoth. And Melko's pet cat was the evil prince of cats named Tevildo. And this is a character that eventually got supplanted by a necromancer named Thu, which evolved into Gorthar the Cruel, or Sauron. And so we see a little bit of Tolkien's dislike of cats come through here. He didn't like cats very much. And Beren and Luthien has a dog versus cat sort of vibe to it, because Huan is the noble hound, and then you have Tevildo, the evil cat, and this sort of like cat versus dog dynamic going on there. And then you even see the Eye of Sauron as a cat's eye, and that's sort of an allusion to his origin, where the character that preceded him in the story was Tevildo, the Prince of Cats. So that's a really good catch there, Fuse Blower. All right, we're coming up on the part that everybody loves, Peter Jackson did an interesting take on this because Galadriel was yelling and there was a lot of special effects happening. And I really like Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, but I don't like that scene so much because I felt that it was overblown. And if you want to see a really perfect version of it, and I don't recommend this movie a lot, but Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings did this part wonderfully. That's like the one thing that was perfect in that movie was Galadriel. She lifted up her wide arms and spread out her hands toward the east in a gesture of rejection and denial. Eärendil, the evening star, most beloved of the elves, shone clear above. So bright was it that the figure of the elven lady cast a dim shadow on the ground. Its rays glanced upon a ring about her finger. It glittered like polished gold overlaid with silver light, and a white stone in it twinkled, as if the elven star had come down to rest upon her hand. Frodo gazed at the ring with awe, for suddenly it seemed to him that he understood. "Yes," she said, divining his thought. "It is not permitted to speak of it, and Elrond could not do so. But it cannot be hidden from the ring-bearer, and one who has seen the eye. Verily, it is in the land of Lorien, upon the finger of Galadriel, that one of the three remains. This is Nenya, the ring of adamant, and I am its keeper. He suspects, but he does not know yet, not yet. Do you not see now? Wherefore your coming is to the footstep of doom. For if you fall, then we are laid bare to the enemy. Yet if you succeed, then our power is diminished, and Lothlorien will fade, and the tides of time will sweep it away. We must depart into the west, or dwindle to a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten." Frodo bent his head. "And what do you wish?" he said at last. "That what should shall be," she answered. "The love of the elves, their land and their works, is deeper than the deeps of the sea, and their regret is undying and cannot ever wholly be assuaged. Yet they will cast all away rather than to submit to Sauron, for they know him now. For the fate of Lothlorien you are not answerable, but only for the doing of your own task. Yet I could wish, were it of any avail, that the One Ring had never been wrought, or had remained forever lost. You are wise and fearless and fair, Lady Galadriel, said Frodo. I will give you the One Ring if you ask for it. It is too great a matter for me. You like the Ralph Bakshi movie because it's bad? I don't think that it's bad. I think it's unfinished. I think that's the problem. Galadriel laughed with a sudden clear laugh. Wise the Lady Galadriel may be, she said. Yet here she has met her match in courtesy. Gently, are you revenged for my testing of your heart at our first meeting? You begin to see with a keen eye. I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired to ask what you offer. For many long years I have pondered what I might do should the great ring come into my hands, and behold, it was brought within my grasp. The evil that was devised long ago works on in many ways, whether Sauron himself stands or falls. Would that not have been a noble deed, to set to the credit of the ring, if I had taken it by force or fear from my guest? And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illumined her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement, and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I passed the test, she said. I will diminish, and go into the west, and remain Galadriel. So this is quite possibly the most important scene in Book 2. This is bigger than anything. Galadriel has a very interesting history. And she's actually banned from going to the West. She may not have taken part in any of the kinslayings that her uncle Feanor or her cousins did. She may have even fought against them. She may not have openly defied the Valar, but she did defy the Valar in walking across the Helcarax because they were told to repent and go back. And her father, Finarfin, did. But she had a lot of anger in her heart about Feanor, and she also wished to have a land of her own and rule it as she may. And that's, you know, what's interesting is that after the War of Wrath, after Morgoth's defeat, all of the Noldor, except for like Feanor's sons, who were pretty much all dead at this point, all of the Noldor were forgiven and welcomed back. And the Valar realized that they had made sort of an error, an overcorrection, but they made an exception for Galadriel, and her response was, I don't want to go there anyway. But what's really interesting, though, is I always think, like, what is it really with her? And in a lot of ways, I think that she had to prove that she wouldn't take up evil means to try to do something good, to take up the One Ring to try and defeat Sauron, and thus become the Lord of the Rings herself, and therefore evil. Well, thankfully, she didn't name the kingdom after herself. It was already named by Amroth, but yeah. You know, it is sort of that vibe. But also there's an element of she didn't actually fight in the War of Wrath. Neither, you know, like I said, before the fall of Morgoth, her and her husband went east out of Beleriand and didn't really take part in it. I think the Valar had an issue with that as well. And now it's come to her. Her land is surrounded, and she's tempted because here's this little guy with this ring. And if he succeeds at what he's going to do, she's going to lose her kingdom because that ring on her finger is going to lose all its power. And then they're going to become like the Wood Elves. And if he fails, Sauron gains the ring, and then she has to take off her ring, and immediately it's not safe. So either way, she's sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and she's really tempted to take that third option and take the One Ring, and she passes the test. And she knows right now the ban has been lifted. She knows it immediately. And that's why she says, I will diminish. I will go into the West, capital W, and remain Galadriel. She's not going to become the Lord of the Rings. And unfortunately, you can't really know her backstory from the movies because he didn't have the rights to those stories, and a lot of it was, written in not even in the Silmarillion, but a lot of it was in Unfinished Tales, Yeah, exactly. They were asked to stay. Now, what's interesting is that in a planned revision that he had, he actually wanted her to fight in that battle, but not with the Noldor. He wanted her to fight with the Falmari against Feanor, which would have been really interesting. But then that she would take a ship and go to Middle-earth to take revenge upon Feanor, which she never did anyway, so... he didn't last long. He got to Middle-earth and then almost died immediately because he goes knocking on Morgoth's door and all the Balrogs come out. And he fights pretty well, but, 7 Balrogs, All right, let's continue because it is starting to get late and I do want to finish this chapter and there's only a page left really here. They stood for a long while in silence. At length the lady spoke again. Let us return, she said. In the morning you must depart. For now we have chosen, and the tides of fate are flowing. I would ask one thing before we go, said Frodo, a thing which I often meant to ask Gandalf and Rivendell. I am permitted to wear the One Ring. Why cannot I see all the others and know their thoughts, of those that wear them? You have not tried, she said. Only thrice have you set the ring upon your finger since you knew what you possessed. Do not try. It would destroy you. Did not Gandalf tell you that the rings give power according to the measure of each possessor? Before you could use that power, you would need to become far stronger, and to train your will to the domination of others. Yet even so, as ring-bearer and one that has borne it on finger, and seen that which is hidden, your sight is grown keener. You have perceived my thought more clearly than many that are accounted wise. You saw the eye of him that holds the 7 and the 9. And did you not see and recognize the ring upon my finger? Did you see my ring? She asked, turning again to Sam. No, lady, he answered. To tell you the truth, I wondered what you were talking about. I saw a star through your finger, but if you'll pardon my speaking out, I think the master was right. I wish you'd take his ring. You'd put things to rights. You'd stop them digging up the gaffer and turning him adrift. You'd make some folk pay for their dirty work. I would, she said. That is how it would begin. But it would not stop with that, alas. We will not speak more of it. Let us go. And that's the end of that chapter. And she's right. She's saying that, yes, if you took up the One Ring, you would start to use it for good. Gandalf said the same thing. He said, I would have great need of it. I would try to use it for good, but it would corrupt me. And it would corrupt somebody more powerful faster, of course. And Gandalf, being an angel, it would get him pretty quick. He would think that he was doing good. Sauron thinks he's doing good. Sauron doesn't think he's the bad guy. The only one who knew that he was evil was Morgoth. Sauron thinks he's bringing order to a chaotic world. Holds the 7. So she's speaking a little bit metaphorically because there aren't even 7 of them left. There's only 3. So, there you go. I think what she's saying really is he holds the remnants of the 7, what's left of them. And of course, we talked about this before of the difference of opinion between Galadriel and Gandalf, because Gandalf had come to believe that the Nazgul themselves held the rings, while Galadriel believed that Sauron had taken them back. And I believe that they're sort of both right, that at one point he did have the Nazgul surrender the 9 to him, but I think he gave them back when he sent them out to look for the 1. And we see this because when Gandalf first speaks of the 7 of the 9, he says that it's Sauron that has them. But then later in the Council of Elrond, he says that the 9 have them. So it's sort of interesting. It's definitely a little bit up in the air there. But yeah, there aren't actually 7 anymore because 4 of them got consumed by the dragons. To diminish is an interesting expression here because it almost seems to relate to being humiliated. In archaic terms, it's a public humiliating. So Galadriel was reluctant to go, but she's choosing humility. That's a very, very good way of putting it because, I mean, it's not like she would be nobody in the West. She would still be Finarfin's daughter. And Finarfin is the king of the Noldor. But at the same time, she would no longer have a realm of her own. She would no longer be sort of like almost worshipped. Like Haldir mentioned it earlier. They don't know about the ring that she has. They think this power is coming from her. They don't realize that it's a ring. And of course, every word that he chose was very purposeful. He wasn't just a linguist. He was a philologist. He worked on the Oxford Dictionary. The W section. That's his section right there. So, yeah, every word was chosen with great care, I think. So, yeah, what's interesting is that when Tolkien wrote his first draft of The Lord of the Rings, he looked back on it and he said, this is very Catholic. And he didn't intend it to be so. It just sort of came out that way. And in revising it, he sort of leaned into it a bit. And we see it really in the next chapter more than anything, because he says the one true allusion to Catholicism that he put in there with great purpose was the lembas bread. And what was interesting, because I always thought the lembas bread was biblical because it reminded me of manna from Exodus, but he said it was the Eucharist, which is more Catholic and less generally Christian. So he says that the lembas is sort of reminiscent of the Eucharist, and it's interesting that it comes from Galadriel and her people, and ultimately from Yavanna, from the West. And, we see it in the fall of Gondolin as well, and we have to, and I talked about this before you came in, but we have to assume that Galadriel had it with her when she came over the Helcaraxa, because it's made from a silver corn that's not indigenous to Middle-earth. So she had to not only have lembas to survive, and for her and her people to survive such a trip across the grinding ice, but also, which also itself is an exodus. The elves taking 27 years to go across the Helcaraxa is a lot like Moses leading people through the desert. And that's why I always thought it was like manna, but Tolkien said it wasn't manna, it was Eucharist. So there is that. Like I said, he didn't set out to write an allegory, and he certainly didn't set out to write any sort of religious apologetics, but he did notice that when he wrote The Lord of the Rings, it was a uniquely Catholic work, and it wasn't something that he was conscious of when he first wrote it, but when he finished it, or at least the first draft of it, he looked back on it and he said, yeah, this is a Catholic work. Because I think it just came through just because of who he is. And what's interesting is that he was not, like the typical Catholic. He was sort of like a man out of time, even in his own time. He didn't like most priests. He hated confession. He had issues with the church, but he was still a man of faith. There's absolutely no denying that. And he was devout in his own sort of unique way. And in diminishing, yes, she is sort of accepting, I wouldn't say a humiliation, but she is showing her humility. And I think that's what the Valar were looking for. They were looking for a show of humility because Galadriel was extremely prideful. She was extremely prideful. Tolkien once referred to her as Amazonian in temperament. He still sung in Latin. Of course, that was absolutely due to his love of languages, he was big on that. As a matter of fact, he actually was at one point. He was in the early 50s. He was working on translating the Jerusalem Bible. He did not get very far in it because he started writing finished writing the Lord of the Rings. He's like, I really got to finish that. He had been working on that for a long time, but they still credited him. So some of his work did wind up in the Jerusalem Bible. I do wish that he had finished more translations because, I mean, we have Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is wonderful, and Pearl, and some of the other medieval poems. He never finished The Fall of Arthur. He never finished the Jerusalem Bible. But, but like Catholic poetry is an important part of his work. One of the first things that really influenced him, in 1914, he read a poem called Christ Day, which had an angel in it named Irendel. And he had the accent on the A rather than the E when he wrote about Earendil. But he originally spelled it Irendel, and with the EL at the end and everything, and that was also where he first sort of came across that Middle English phrase, which, depending on whether it's late Middle English or early Middle English, is either Middle-earth or Midengard, Middle-earth, and that sort of really started to, I think, pique his interest and sort of get his imagination going. And when he started to write, his own stories, that was the name that he chose. He chose Middle-earth for the fall of Gondolin and the children of Hurin and the Lay of Leithian, And thank you for that. Yes, 62 watching. I actually see the number as 47, but I guess you're probably looking at a more accurate number since I'm looking at through streaming software. We're going to be ending the stream, but I will ask, guys, thank you so much for coming by. I thank you so much. And if you've been watching the stream and you've not subscribed to me, I'm going to ask that you do that because it really helps me out. Like the stream. It will go up as a regular video for members tonight, and non-members will be able to see it to their will in a few weeks. Also, the previous video, which had never became available, this was a mistake on my part. I'm going to make it available tonight, probably right around midnight. And that is going to go up for everybody right away. But consider membership. If you see there, look at the chat on the YouTube side. We have Chewy there, who said he's starving at work. He has that little Gandalf G rune there. Notice that his name shows up in green rather than gray. He's a member. And members get some cool emotes. They get to see all my videos early, and they really just are supporting me. So just consider it. Consider membership. It's only $5 a month. But if you can't do that, that's fine. I do ask, though, when you watch my videos, always hit that like button and leave me a comment. Thank you guys so much for coming by. I really, really enjoyed this one. And yep, and there's Alice Williamstone there. And notice that there's a little sun, a little sun there, because it's been over a year. And you'll notice that your rune, your Gandalf rune, will evolve over time. You'll get a moon, and then a sun, and then several suns. Or I guess stars, you would say there. And hey there, 3 Minrevs. How's it going? We're just wrapping up here. But, oh, thank you for the tip, Chewy. Thank you so much. Another fun, engaging evening to keep me company at work. Thank you so much for the tip. I am going to tell you guys the Tolkien streaming schedule here, because we are going to be streaming most Thursdays. Not every Thursday, but most Thursdays. So next week, the 15th, we are going to do another gameplay of The Hobbit. We're going to continue through The Hobbit for GameCube and do more of that. And I'll be, just analyzing that game, which is actually based on the book, not any of the movies, and what's accurate and what's not accurate. It's a surprisingly accurate game for being an action-adventure game. That's on the 15th. The 22nd, I haven't decided on. I will be streaming on the 22nd. I will let you guys know. And then the next stream after that will be 2 weeks after that, on the 5th of June, and I'll have Matt and Sid with me, and we'll be doing the Council of Tolkien. And by the way, if you caught the last episode of the Council of Tolkien and you saw that we had, well, let me go over to there right quick. You see, I had that still image of Matt because his webcam wasn't working. We figured it out. It turns out that his computer had like a cutoff switch, which is sort of a privacy switch for his webcam. and it was not actually on the camera, because I asked him to check to see if there's any switches on the camera, and he said there weren't. But it turns out the switch was just located somewhere else. Really bad design. It's working now, so that'll be fixed. And also, me and Matt are making a promise. Sid's audio will be better. We're making a commitment to that, because Sid was very muddy and warbly, and it's just a shame that his great wisdom comes through that way on the streams, and it was especially bad. But we're making sure that his audio is going to be better for the June 5th meeting. And then after that, the next one after that, and this will be the last one that I mentioned, June 12th, we'll be back here with we might finish the Fellowship of the Ring. I don't know how many chapters we have left here. Well, I mean, let's see. We've got Farewell to Lorien. It was just a short chapter. The Great River, that's sort of a long chapter. And then the Breaking of the Fellowship is a short one. We might finish it next time. Depends on how late we go. And then, obviously we'll want to roll into the Two Towers as well. But anyway, guys, let's end the stream. I thank everybody for coming by, and I especially thank Chewy for tipping me, and anybody who joins as a member, or those of you that like the videos and comment on the videos and subscribe to the channel and help the channel grow. Because even those small bits of engagement, like just leaving a comment, even if it's just a thumbs up or an emote or something, it helps, because then I hit heart react and then I answer it, and it shows that there's engagement, and the videos get sent out to more people. Oh, absolutely. We'll do Unfinished Tales. We'll do the Silmarillion. We'll do the history of Middle-earth at some point. We'll do Beren and Luthien. We'll do Fall of Gondolin. We're going to do all of it. It's just going to take a while. I mean, like I said, this is our 9th stream of the Fellowship of the Ring. It looks like it's going to be 10, possibly 11, but I think it's going to be 10 streams. The Two Towers is even longer. So, we'll see. Anyway, guys, we're going to end here. I will see you guys next time.